Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto becomes a Shinigami Captain. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by Keymasten and link in the description and support writer. Let's start the video. The 10th district of the Rukongai was well within the safer and more comfortable areas. Low crime rate, regular Shinigami patrols and an almost non-existent hollow presence. All in all, one of the more ideal places for a soul to live once they've moved on from the mortal plane. Curiously, of the first 50 districts, the 10th was the least populated. This could be attributed to the harsher landscape. The 10th district was filled with dense forests of huge trees and incredible mountain ranges. The flora and fauna were more hostile and dangerous compared to other districts. There were a number of smaller towns and outposts, mainly occupied by hunters, lumberjacks and miners. One soul, Bakura, was a hunter. He had died 130 years ago and managed to create a nice life for himself. He'd gotten married and even adopted a young son. He knew the forest and mountains like the back of his hand. He was currently tracking a deer herd farther north than normal. His wife had urged him not to go this far. There were rumors that a demon had moved into the shadow of the mountain. People reported hearing strange sounds and feeling an ominous presence while traveling through the area. Bakura was above such superstitions, and if there was a hollow presence, the Gete would have already taken care of it. In fact, he knew the Gete had sent members to investigate. He had given directions to a pair of them only a few years ago, and they came back a week later no worse for wear. His musing was interrupted by the arrival of the herd. Around 10 dozen and a few bucks had entered the clearing. He drew an arrow and held a breath. At the moment he loosed, the herd snapped to attention and scattered. His arrow sunk into a tree uselessly. He heard a throat being cleared behind him and turned as quick as he could with his hand going to the knife at his waist. His movement was halted when he noticed the two men standing in front of him. He relaxed even further when he noticed the Shinigami robes and swords at their sides. Bakura bowed his head in greetings, "Hello Shinigami-sans," trying to hide his annoyance at their sudden appearance. The shorter one, a man looking like he was in his 50s with a short goatee and stepped forward. "Please excuse us, we did not mean to intrude on your hunt. We were traveling through the area and hoped you could direct us somewhere. We would be willing to compensate you for your aid." As he spoke he reached into his robe and withdrew a pouch, visibly filled with money. The Shinigami tossed it to Bakura, who took a moment to weigh it in his hand before tucking it into his pack. "Very well, where are you looking to go?" The other Shinigami stepped forward. He seemed younger but not by much. He had slicked back, traditionally styled hair with hints of gray in the black. Over his uniform he wore a blue overcoat. "We understand there is an area where the other souls avoid, closer to the mountains." Bakura nodded. "Yes, the superstition, they say while in the shadow of the cliffs, you can feel the eyes of the demons upon your back." "Bah. Nonsense. Follow me, there is an older path that leads right to it." As he went to retrieve his arrow, he found himself curious. If it wasn't demons or hollows out there, then what was it? They rose with dawn the next morning and traveled until the evening. They made light conversation. He learned from Sarutobi that he was the 4th seed of the 1st division, while the man with the overcoat was actually the 3rd seed, as well as the headmaster of the Shinigami Academy. This only confused him more, and eventually as they stopped for the second night he felt the need to ask. As Bakura passed out small dishes of meat and oats he sat down himself. "Sarutobi-san, I have to ask, what would a high-ranking soul reaper and an academy instructor want in the shadows of a mountain?" Sarutobi finished eating and then took out a simple wooden pipe and began smoking. "Ah, you see Bakura-kun, we aren't searching for something, we are searching for someone, isn't that right Shinobi-san?" Bakura was about to question Sarutobi when he heard the rustling of leaves. He nearly had a heart attack when he turned to the left and saw a figure cloaked in black standing at the edge of their camp. He thought perhaps this was another Shinigami, but the stranger bore no sword or shihakuso. Instead, they seemed to be wearing a one-piece suit of some black cloth with pouches strapped to his legs and a hood and scarf covering his face and head. The figure spoke, revealing itself to be a man with a smooth and guarded voice. "Shinigami-sans, we have already received a delegation from you. Our answer has not changed, we ask that you and your companion return to the Sirte and respect our wish for isolation." The so-called shinobi seemed to be waiting for a reply. Tell me, is it so wrong for an old man to want to see his children again?" The shinobi tensed, obviously unsure of what to make of it. "Who are you?" was the stranger's reply. Sarutobi stood up and walked closer to the fire, smiling the whole way. "It's good to see you again, Shino." The shinobi stayed silent, then began to tentatively walk forward until he was staring at Sarutobi from across the open flame. Even his eyes were covered by a strange visor with 3 red slits. And instantly, the man dropped to one knee with his head bowed. "Sandame-sama." As Bakura watched a strange scene unfold, he started to think that maybe his wife had been right. Sarutobi waved as the kind hunter Bakura started his trek back home. He was a nice enough fellow and obviously skilled, hopefully his story would help ease the tension and superstition associated with this part of the district. The engine Shiro Akakiba had been waiting until the current advanced class at the Shinigami Academy was done before coming out to District 10. He wanted to make the journey as soon as he found out about the Shinobi enclave that had been built but had to restrain himself from investigating until he received approval from the captain commander. How much farther, Shino-kun? They were traveling through the trees towards the mountain. Just another hour and we will reach the forward outpost Sandame-sama. Shortly after crossing over into Soul Society, many shinobi learned that chakra no longer worked, they had lost the physical component and were left with only Yang chakra, or as the Shinigami know it, Ryatsu. While it could still be used for internal applications like enhanced speed or healing, jutsus were no longer possible. Hiruzen contemplated the fate of the shinobi who had started appearing in Soul Society 20 years ago. It seemed that the elemental nations existed in a different realm than the world of the living that most souls came from. As such it had been sealed, and the Gate and Hollows were unable to access it. When Minato had summoned the Shinigami, he had in fact summoned a representation of their power, and by doing so, he opened up the path between realms. Unfortunately, not all souls in the elemental nations could be consoed. It seems that because of the realm's disconnect from the Soul Society, nature itself had created a force, the Shinigami, that took any souls that did not possess a certain amount of Ryatsu at their time of death and instantly returned them to the cycle of reincarnation. At the same time, if a soul would normally sent to hell after passing on, it would instead be sent back into reincarnation, unless their soul was tainted of course. Orochimaru and Madara would not be seeing Soul Society, and Hiruzen was grateful every day for that fact. The soft growl triggered Hiruzen's reflexes and without skipping a beat, he turned his next sprint into a leap. He smoothly sailed over the outstretched claws of the wild cat that had attacked from the underbrush. The creature skidded across the forest floor but quickly turned on the spot to make another leap. The cat's quick reactions were still too slow. Before it could tense its leg muscles, its throat had been slit. Quietly, it fell to the dirt. The group running through the forest continued on without interruption. For a soul born in the elemental nations, to become a plus you had to have chakra of at least Chunin or above. When he first arrived, he discovered that the Shinigami had only started to conso shinobi regularly 5 or so years before his death. The consequence of having to go through Central 46 for permission and official acceptance of the newly dubbed Elemental Realm into the Gate 13's protection. It was decided that the 10th Division, under the command of Captain Isan Shiba, would be responsible for patrols and monitoring. Upon Saratobi's awakening in District 20 of Rukongai, he decided to seek out other shinobi. Once he understood just how immense Soul Society was, he became disheartened, choosing to open a tobacco shop instead. It was a calm and relaxing time, except when he was quickly reminded that he was only old in mind and appearance. His body felt spry and strong with none of the wear and tear it displayed while still alive. To be honest, while he was comfortable spending his days drinking teas and smoking, he soon became bored and began training in the evening. Stretching long-gone muscles with the aid of Ryatsu instead of chakra, making the workouts more taxing and resistant. As a result, Hiruzen estimated that he was in better shape than in his prime. What convinced him to finally end his vacation was when he inexplicably found himself not in his tobacco shop but in the living world. Inhabiting his old body and fighting a war against Uchiha Madara. It awoke his long-dormant battle fever and had his cold blood pumping. While he had cultivated a personality and aura of a kindly grandfather, for more than half of his life, Saratobi had been an active wartime jonin. To survive that kind of life and come out sane and in control of his faculties meant he in some way enjoyed the battle and killing. By acknowledging that part of himself, he gained mastery over his own mind. Once he returned to the Soul Society, the memories of his time among the living became cloudy. He could clearly remember the conflict and seeing some familiar faces, but there hadn't been much time for talk during the war. Hiruzen decided to close his shop and enter the Shinigami Academy. Fate, it seemed, agreed with him. Barely a week after he had decided to enroll, 2 seated officers from the 1st Division appeared and told him the Gate 13 had questions for him. He accompanied them without complaint, curious as to how they got his name. When he arrived in the Sariti, he was understandably impressed by the scale of the place. He was decidedly less impressed when he was shown to a secluded barracks under guard inside the 1st Division headquarters. There he found dozens of other former shinobi. He recognized a few Leaf shinobi and had a number of happy reunions. Most surprising of which was his son Asuma. Flashback: Hiruzen had just finished shaking hands with Hayate, free of his illness, when he heard a cough from behind him. He turned with a kind smile on his face. The smile froze when he laid eyes upon the same ebony hair that grew from his head and eyes that matched his late wife's. Tears welled on the edges of his vision. He took a step forward but stopped abruptly. Asuma looked at him for a few seconds before stepping forward himself and slowly embracing the man who birthed him. Hey old monkey, it's good to see you, I missed you dad. Asuma-kun. Hiruzen pulled back slightly. You were so young. Hiruzen couldn't help but lament. I saved my students. Asuma's cool composure cracked as he started blinking away tears. But I didn't make it. Then you died. Well my son, have no regrets. You don't understand. Asuma's breath hitched. Hiruzen frowned. Kurenai was pregnant. I left her alone. I'll never see my child take their first steps. I failed them before I even met them. Asuma had bowed his head, trying to hide his tears. His son's arms were shaking. Hiruzen recalled the last time they were in this position. It was after Bawako's death. Asuma had returned from his duties as one of the 12 guardian ninja and sat before her grave crying silently. Hiruzen had stood nearby, unsure how to act. He and Asuma had long since tried and failed to reconcile. In his grief, he foolishly chose to leave Asuma to his pain. Not this time. Hiruzen embraced his son and led him to a secluded corner with a couch. Sitting him down, he put Asuma's head into his shoulder and began humming a tune Bawako had used to serenade their sons to sleep. At that moment, they were not shinobi, nor Hokage Jonin. They were finally once again, father and son. Flashback end. We have arrived Sandaime. Shino's monotone voice broke through Sarutobi's thoughts. He noticed they had made significant distance, judging from the sun, it was midday. They had stopped in a small section of forest close to the nearest mountain. He watched as Shino approached a tree and began knocking on it. He smirked at the familiar Konoha outpost procedure. Of course the code had changed since his death, but the outline was the same. Sarutobi waited and heard the return knock. A group of 3, dressed identically to Shino, appeared around them high in the trees. A man, women and the last one seemed shorter than his allies. Hodo, report. He recognized the voice before turning around and seeing the distinct purple hair. My, Yuga-chan, you don't recognize this old man. He saw her eyes widen and the snap of a branch. There were 3 people across from him. Yuga seemed unable to break eye contact with him. Sandaime? Is it really you? Yes it is Yuga, I'm glad to see you. Hiruzen gave her a kind smile. She returned his smile. Even behind her scarf he could see much joy she felt and it warmed his heart. So have I Sandaime-sama, so have I. Hiruzen turned to the other 2, Tenzo. Is that really you? My how you've grown. The once closed-off child now turned man simply responded with a carefree chuckle. Thank you Sandaime-sama, by the way I go by Yamato now. Good to know. Turning to the smallest member of the squad he asked, and who is this youngster? The figure shifted uneasily under the retired Hokage's gaze. I'm Yumino Haruka Sandaime-sama. Now that brought Hiruzen up short. Yumino? Are you Iruka-kun's son? Yes sir. May I ask who your mother was? The child's eyes went wide. Oh. She was Ayame Ichiraku. Hiruzen couldn't help but chuckle fondly. I remember little Ayame, she used to serve Naruto and I ramen all the time. May I ask how old you are Haruka? Haruka seemed confused by the question. I'm 25 years old. Hiruzen looked startled at this. How old were you when you died? The boy looked no older than 15. I was 19. Hiruzen turned to the headmaster. Why does he look so young? It is not uncommon for some souls to regress in age after death. Jinshiro had been observing the interactions with a curious and critical eye. Usually that is accompanied by memory loss though. So I'm unsure of the cause in this case. Oh well, a mystery for another day. Sandaime? Yes Yuigao. We really do need to know why you're here. Hiruzen took a moment to collect himself. Yes of course. In short, I and Akakiba-san are here to negotiate with the Shinobi Enclave. You understand we already gave them an answer? I do, but I would like to meet your leaders personally and hear them out. The captain commander will trust me if I return and advise him to desist from further talks. The scouts shared a glance with each other. Finally Yamato and Shino gave a nod. Yuga turned back to her old leader. Very well, we will take you farther than the last group of Shinigami who came to visit us. It would be an honor to host the Sandaime Hokage, but your companion must agree to be blindfolded and deafened for the duration of our trip. Hiruzen turned towards Akakiba with an unsure furrow of his brows. It was returned with a calm nod. Lead on. Hiruzen felt the enclave before he saw it. The amount of spiritual energy emanating from the seemingly flat mountain face was extremely subtle. Had he not been searching for some sign of life then he most likely would have missed it. They crossed over a certain threshold and a large part of the sloped cliff face simply faded away, revealing a large wall with a solid stone gate. He couldn't help but be impressed. My Yugao, you've been busy. Yes Sandaime, it is truly amazing what happens when you mix the best and brightest from every village. It offers a glimpse into what the elemental nations may now look like. As the group stopped at the massive gates, Yugao, Yamato, Shino and Haruka all approached a small slate on the bottom right hand of the rock face. Yugao and Shino put their mouths almost to the stone and whispered something and then tapped on the slate in a quick pattern. As they backed away, a small door receded from the wall to their far left. It seemed the gates were a distraction. Akakiba was blindfolded and deafened with pieces of wax before they had reached the decoy gate. Once they had entered the wall, it led to a long narrow corridor. After walking and making a handful of confusing and twisting turns before entering an antechamber. There restored his senses. Please follow me, Sandaime-sama, the council will be gathering in a few hours to hear your petition. In the meantime, an escort will be assigned to guide and watch you for the rest of your stay. I apologize, Sandaime-sama, but it's protocol. Hiruzen waved off her apology with a gentle smile. As Hiruzen stood on the balcony of his room, he couldn't help but gaze longingly the enclave before him. It was nostalgic to see the architecture of his home. The enclave was situated in a valley hidden by the mountains. It was filled with building made in many different styles, all built with cement and dark wood. From his hotel room he could see the main administrative and government seat, the Cage Tower. A 3-story building with a rounded dome roof bearing the marks of all the major and minor ninja villages. Surrounding it was a sprawling open-air market. It was mid-afternoon and there was quite a crowd mingling and haggling. He noticed that there was a sense of peace in the air. Laughs were heard and smiles seen. He heard a knock on his door, opening it to find a familiar face staring back at him. Kakashi-kun. Hiruzen immediately stepped forward and pulled the silver-haired man into a hug. Said man was almost too shocked to respond, eventually smirking and returning the hug. It's good to see you, Sandaime-sama. We've missed you. Let me have a look at you, Kakashi. Looking his former Anbu captain up and down, he noticed the man was older, probably closer to his 40s, wearing the same face mask, but lacking any forehead protector and surprisingly no Sharingan. Sandaime, please Kakashi, call me Hiruzen. Of course Hiruzen, would you and your companion like to have some tea with me before the meeting? I would love to, but Akikiba is currently finishing up some paperwork needed for the meeting. They exited the hotel and began walking towards the market. He noticed many people on either sides of them were stopping and bowing. They arrived at a small tea house named Fire Snake Tea. It was a quaint little place, with well-maintained tea sets and soothing music being played by a group in the corner. The waitress he didn't recognize walked up to them and bowed, "Welcome back Hokage-sama, your usual seat." Hiruzen was about to respond out of habit when he saw the waitress was in fact asking Kakashi instead of him. At Kakashi's nod they were led to the second floor and a table by the window, with a leaf insignia delicately inlaid into the table. As they sat, Hiruzen simply crossed his arms and stared at his friend. His great-grand student began chuckling and scratching his ear, obviously somewhat embarrassed. "Ma, did I forget to mention I was the Rakudame Hokage?" Chuckling fondly, Hiruzen responded proudly, "You did indeed. I'm proud of you, Kakashi. Wait, if you were Rakudame then who was Nanadame?" "Naruto, of course." Hiruzen was shocked silent, but his shock quickly gave way for a wide smile. If some tears formed at the corners of his eyes, it wasn't Kakashi's place to mention them. They drank tea, keeping the conversation light. Kakashi informed Hiruzen of the many events that had befallen the leaf between his death and Kakashi's. Most frequently though, he spoke of Uzumaki Naruto. Now Hiruzen couldn't stop the tears falling from his eyes as he heard about Naruto taking up the position of 7th Hokage, marrying Hinata, having children, and eventually helping to create the United Shinobi Council. An organization that helps strengthen ties and keep the peace between ninja while presenting a united front against the daimyos and yakuza. A situation he would have to ask for context on later. I knew he would be great. The will of fire burned brightest in him. Very true. Well, it's time we made our way to the meeting. After rejoining Akikiba, the two were treated to a tour of the Cage Tower, a well-built and organized office structure dedicated to managing the enclave. Hiruzen was still being kept in the dark about how the enclave sustained itself. It was obviously no easy task to keep an isolated community of hundreds of people sheltered, fed and employed. The tour ended in front of a sturdy oaken door bearing a single engraved kanji. "Shinobi?" Hiruzen asked. Kakashi nodded. "It symbolizes the separation of all other ties and allegiances. When in this room we are dedicated to the people collectively known as Shinobi. It was a powerful symbol during the Fourth Great War. The meeting should be commencing soon. I have to go in for the beginning, but when you hear the bell walk straight through and you'll have your say." "It was wonderful to see you again, Hiruzen." With a quick but deep bow, Kakashi entered the room and shut the door behind him. It only took 10 or so minutes before a soft chime sounded above Hiruzen. He promptly opened the door and proceeded forward. The hallway was lined with soft lanterns and lead into a huge domed antechamber with vaulted ceiling and open windows, allowing a cool breeze and natural sunlight to fill the chamber. In the center of the room was a large U-shaped wooden table. Sitting around it were pairs of chairs with some very recognizable faces. He could see the Raikage, slightly more wrinkled but still a giant of a man. Inoki the fence-sitter, looking better than Hiruzen had ever seen him, and finally his own student, Tsunade, retaining her ageless beauty. Judging from how Kakashi and Tsunade were seated together, then he could only assume the unfamiliar faces were other Kage's successors. In retrospect, he should have expected there to be younger faces. Inoki and himself aside, most Kage either retired or died by the time they reached their 50s. A deed that reminded him of the Tsunade and Kiriki spoke first. Let it be recorded, the Shinobi Council welcomed Shinigami officers Hiruzen Sarutobi, the Sandaime Hokage and Genshiro Makakiba, regarding the Shinobi Council's decision to decline forming ties with the Gate 13. The floor is yours. Hiruzen and Genshiro exchanged looks. Genshiro's slight nod gave Hiruzen the signal, as you are no doubt aware, other than myself and my son, there are no shinobi in the ranks of the Gate 13. I am the 4th seat of the 1st Division. A position of authority and responsibility. I will not mince words. The Captain Commander has ordered me to negotiate the integration of any willing shinobi into the Gate 13. The man next to A, presumably the Goddamn Raikage, responded lazily, I thought we made it pretty clear that as long as Central 46 required all shinobi to reveal their personal or clan secrets and renounce loyalty to the Shinobi Council, no ninja, whether they originally be from stone, cloud, sand, leaf, mist or any village would become Shinigami. Their response was a passive-aggressive message dismissing us. What changed their minds? Genshiro took the silence following the statement as his cue, through hard negotiations and appeals made by Sarutobi-san and myself. The conditions have been modified. We're here to present a new offer and a demonstration. Tsunade sat forward, interest obviously piqued. He continued, all shinobi would be welcome to join the Shinigami Academy like other applicants. No clan secrets or so-called bloodlines would need to be shared. As an added benefit, any shinobi clan that has 3 generations serve as Shinigami for a total of 300 years would be eligible for minor noble status recognized by Central 46. The council listened attentively. Hiruzen continued from Genshiro's explanation, this would give your shinobi the option to join the Gate 13. I personally find it very rewarding and a nice change of pace. I still see combat, but instead of against fellow ninja, I now fight to protect the souls of the living. It is rewarding and an eye-opening experience to see what the Shinigami are capable of, to see what we are now capable of. We may have lost our chakra, but we have gained something more. Perhaps a demonstration is in order. It was Inoki who asked that they be allowed to bring in their respective advisors to watch. Among the advisors for Konoha were the 2 Naras, Shikaku and Shikamaru. Now both roughly the same age, it was the scars on Shikaku's face that set the two apart. Yet their minds were clearly as sharp as ever. The space around Hiruzen was cleared of furniture. His katana was brought from the secure lockup it was taken to after his arrival. He graciously accepted it and presented it so the council could see it in better detail. It was a normal-length katana in a dark brown sheath. The handle was wrapped in white and red silk, on the pommel was the Sarutobi clan symbol, the guard was a silver circle. Hiruzen went through a brief explanation on the nature of the Zanpakuto and how important it was. Do not think of it as just a weapon. It is as much a part of you as your chakra nature. Something unique and personalized. A power, a being, born from your own soul. I will now demonstrate the first release, Shikai. Hiruzen widened his stance and bent forward, his sword was held behind his back horizontally. Awaken from your grave, Fury-bushi, old warrior. There was a pulse of Reiatsu, and Hiruzen's katana lengthened and turned black, finally rounding around and turning into a bow staff identical to his once loyal summon, Enma's adamantine staff form. In this form I'm stronger, faster and have access to more Reiatsu, as well as the special ability of my Shikai. I would ask that you keep my abilities a secret between us. Details of a Shinigami's releases are considered private. My Zanpakuto's ability is to divide into a number of other staffs which I can use too from shields and cages. Thrusting his staff forward, his staff cap expanded and a pattern of bow staffs interlocked with each other created a large square, roughly the size of a man, in between Hiruzen and the council. With a quick motion the pattern was absorbed back into the main staff. You said this was the first release. There are more. Unsurprisingly it was Shikamaru who asked the question. Correct, to be eligible for a seated officer position you must at least achieve Shikai. The final release is Bankai, the ultimate merging of you and your Zanpakuto. It takes many years to achieve and then master your Bankai. To even be eligible for a captainship in the Gate 13 one must have their Bankai release. Have you achieved your final release, Sandaime? I achieved Bankai only 2 years ago after a decade of intense study. I still have not mastered it. If you have a way to dampen the spiritual pressure that leaves this room I will demonstrate. The cages exchanged glances and all nodded. One of the Mizukage's assistants left the room briefly and Hiruzen could feel security seals activate around the chamber. Slowly, Hiruzen found his center using deep meditative breaths. Taking his bow staff and bringing it to his front vertically. He slammed it into the ground with an echoing thump while shouting, awaken from your grave, dust off your arms, and rule the battlefield once more, Keiko Adaina Bushi. Great warrior from ages past. A bright white energy erupted from his staff engulfing his entire form, flowing past him like a flaring wind. Then as if cut off from its source, the wind vanished. Tsunade could not help but gasp. The rest were dumbstruck. There before them stood not Hiruzen Sarutobi, the old grandfather, but the man who was known as the Shinobi no Kami, a war veteran, a warrior god. His power could now be felt like a physical force. It filled the room and made any non-cage shake, and some even collapsed to their knees. Inoki judged him as equivalent of one, maybe two cages. Ever since coming to Soul Society, it was difficult to actually measure an individual's strength. Ryatsu and chakra were fundamentally different. An impressive feat, and the old monkey wasn't even one of those legendary captains. The Shinobi Council had been formed because of the cage's individual experience and knowledge, not necessarily their strength. Once their introspection was done, they turned their attention to Hiruzen's changed appearance. Standing straight with his back squared, gone were the black and white robes, instead he was clad in a black bodysuit. He had no footwear, but his feet had changed into hands. Wearing dark red greaves that led up to a bright gold overcoat covered with an intricately decorated breastplate and scale skirt. His arms had wrist guards and pauldrons of the same make. His face had changed as well, his grey hair had gone youthful black and grown down his neck to frame his face. Hiruzen's brow had thickened and nose widened. They could see some sharpened teeth when exhaled a deep breath. The last change was his staff. No longer simple black with gold caps, it was bronze with intricate patterns and kanji seemingly embossed into the surface. "So Shinobi Council, what say you?" Not even his voice was left untouched, there was a thrum of power that echoed underneath his question. Kakashi gave the final word, "We will deliberate and give you our answer tomorrow." "Very well, we've all agreed that the best course of action is to send a small delegation of specialists to become Shinigami. They will learn as much as they can, gauge their strengths, and then report back on the merits or detriments of our merge." Chijuro finished summarizing their morning meeting. They had only taken a short break to sleep and recuperate before returning to the discussion. "Please present your candidates." Bay and Derry both stood and passed out a thin white folder around to the other cage and the full Shinobi Advisory Council. "We recommend Sato Amoy, one of our foremost Kenjutsu masters, to study their styles and training regimes. Presumably the Shinigami are all taught the same style. Amoy will be able to determine if the style has any real value or if it can be better adapted for Shinobi. As well as C, a top sensor. He can help gauge the average power levels and growth rate of Shinigami." Amoy, by the time of his death at 46, was the foremost Kenjutsu master in Kumo. He was Derry's right-hand man, the teacher of several very successful apprentices, and was responsible for no less than 3 completely unique Kenjutsu styles, known commonly as the 3 Thunder styles. The Boom style, which uses explosive techniques, the Crash style, utilizing lightning-style attacks, and finally the Silent style, which incorporates the Shadow Clone Jutsu. C continued to serve Kumo and was eventually killed in battle with missing nins from Kusa during an ambush. His legacy lived on through the personalized training regime he designed for sensors to perfect their art. "All in favor?" All hands rose. An assistant stamped a mission assignment paper. R and his successor, Kenkuro's daughter Haseki, both stood with their brown folder. "We recommend Nara Shikamaru, one of our top strategists and analysts. His focus would be the non-combat information. How do the Shinigami think? What is their history? How does their society work? He will profile the Shinigami as a whole to aid us in any future negotiations or decisions." Shikamaru died as a famous strategist and shogi player and Naruto's chief advisor. Of course, being Shikamaru, his proudest accomplishment was not his long and proud career as a Konoha shinobi. It was his various published books, Cloud Watching Made Simple, The Shogi Guide, and of course a poetry book titled, Life is Troublesome. Tsunade and Kakashi went next. "We nominated Chiha Sakura, her extensive medical knowledge would make her perfect to learn the ins and outs of their healing arts. We also nominate Rock Lee to observe their taijutsu knowledge." Sakura, after retiring from active duty to raise her children, continued working at the Konoha hospital and was eventually regarded as matching her teacher Tsunade. Her research on the nature of bloodlines and Jinchuriki was some of the most revolutionary medical texts to ever be published. Rock Lee, despite his disability, eventually worked his way into the annals of history as the Iron Fist. His training evolved the Goken style taught by Maido Gai into the unique form called Tetsuken, a style based on opening and manipulating the tenketsu of his body to harden his muscles to resemble iron. It was in fact comparable to opening mini versions of the 8 gates. In fact, many considered his disability as a bloodline of the Lee clan. His son Metal having inherited it to a lesser degree. The Cages of Mist slid their folder forward. Our nominee is Sasuke Uchiha, an assassination and stealth specialist. He would be able to accurately assess and deconstruct the Sariti's defenses and capabilities. Sasuke passed away killing an insane seal master from the cult of Jashin. He left behind 2 daughters and 2 grandchildren. His mission since finding the afterlife has been protecting the Shinobi Alliance and spending time with his wife. Sasuke was renowned for being a master of the 5 elements on par with the late Sandaime Hokage. Finally, Kuretsuchi stood while her grandfather sat. "We would like to nominate one man whose sole goal would be to rise through the ranks and eventually become a captain, thereby giving us support in the highest echelon of the Gate 13. The other cage nodded along. We nominate Uzumaki Naruto. The announcement was met with silence until Kakashi spoke up. You're aware that Naruto hasn't died yet, correct? We don't know when he'll cross over either. Would it not be prudent to select someone who could enter the academy as soon as possible? It was Derry who responded, I think it would be a good idea. If Naruto found the Gate 13 worth being a part of, it would ease a lot of tension. Are you suggesting we postpone our entry into the Gate until Uzumaki-san had crossed over and been informed? Yes, in fact we should make it a condition of our acceptance that the Shinigami watch Naruto and have him immediately found and brought to us after his passing. Very well, all agreed. The argument closed, and they gave the order for Sarutobi to be brought back before them. Chapter 2. Waking up dead. Captain Commander Yamamoto woke from his sleep slightly earlier than normal that morning. He had taken his regular tea in his office and finished off his paperwork faster than what would normally be expected. For most this wouldn't mean anything, but not Lieutenant Sasuke. Serving as his captain's second for over 200 years gave him an insight into the mind of the elderly leader. It was quite obvious to him that the captain commander was excited and a bit apprehensive. As they were preparing for the captain's meeting, he suddenly understood why the commander was anxious. Today was Sarutobi-san's return and would be the report on the renegotiations between the Gate and the Shinobi Alliance. Sasuke had to admit he was impressed with Sarutobi's abilities. A decade more experience and he would surely make lieutenant, and his power levels were close to captain strength. If the other shinobi were anything like him, even if they were weaker, they would make an excellent addition to the Gate 13. An influx of battle-hardened veterans could be nothing but helpful. Yet he couldn't help be wary. He remembered the reports from years ago and learning that there were shinobi who could forcefully pull souls back into the world of the living. In reaction, the Central 46 demanded that all dead shinobi be taken into custody and their techniques and secrets be catalogued in case any of them manifest while in Soul Society. This caused an outrage among said Shinigami, and after heated arguments with Central 46, the captain commander was able to negotiate for the shinobi's freedom. Almost all of them left except, as far as he knew, Sarutobi and his son, Sarutobi Asuma, the 9th seat of the 3rd division. As far as they knew, the shinobi had scattered across the Sarate until the next wave of shinobi died during and after the 4th Great Shinobi War. These shinobi and those that followed apparently had been part of a shinobi alliance. They pushed for the alliance to continue on even in the afterlife and spent many years gathering and reconnecting the scattered ninja. Finally, they had managed to establish a hidden enclave somewhere in the Rukongai. This only made Central 46 more nervous. That was what prompted the renegotiations with the Shinobi Alliance. Sasuke was awakened from his thoughts by the arrival of the other captains. The meeting room was soon filled with the 12 other leaders of the Gate 13. Once everyone had settled, the captain commander smashed his cane onto the ground. Bring in Sarutobi-san. The nearest servant quickly exited the room and returned with Sarutobi. Kneeling before the captains, Sarutobi awaited his commander's questions. Well, Sarutobi-san, was your mission a success? Su Taicho, I made contact with the enclave and met with the Shinobi Council. What was their response? They were agreeable, but decided to first send a small number of trusted shinobi through the academy first. Excellent, when will they be starting? Sarutobi hesitated. Their last condition for the agreement is that the first group of students must include Uzumaki Naruto. Captain Kichiki Ginrei, leader of the 6th division, narrowed his eyes. And what is so special about this Uzumaki character? The captains were surprised when Sarutobi actually glared at the captain. Uzumaki Naruto was one of my successors as the Nanadame Hokage. He was also elected as the first Gokage, the first head of the Shinobi Alliance. Essentially, he was the equivalent of the Su Taicho. This statement was met by silence from the captains. Can this man be trusted? Sarutobi simply chuckled. Please, Su Taicho, he used to call me Jiji when he was boy. I knew him very well and he has surpassed all my expectations. He would be a great addition to the Gate. I am unsure of where or what he is doing now, but I would recommend a 247 watch to ensure his passing is as quick as possible. The captains immediately started conversations with each other, all expressing different opinions on the conditions and the shinobi in general. Once again, the captain commander restored order. We will take your suggestion under consideration. You have done well, Sarutobi-san, you are dismissed. With a deep bow, Sarutobi left the room. Any questions? Shihoin Yuruchi, captain of the 2nd division and head of the special forces, had a look of curiosity. Yes, Su Taicho, I was wondering how much intel has been gathered by the 10th division on the capabilities of these shinobi in combat. I understand they exhibit strange powers in the form of their own version of Kido and Bakuto, but what else are they good at? The entire group turned towards the broad black-haired man with a 10 emblazoned on his back. From what we've been able to observe, all shinobi are trained in the basics of Hakuda, lesser forms of Ho-Ho and of course, their own version of Kido known as Jutsu. Typically training begins at 8 or 9, and they graduate the academy at 12 or 13. Captain Shiba Isin answered. So young Captain Anohana Retsu of the 4th division softly remarked. Our best estimates would put their experienced genin on par with new unseated Shinigami, their chunin on par with experienced unseated officers, and their jonin as equivalent with our seated officers. With a higher ranked jonin reaching lieutenant strength. No one missed the manic smile that was growing on Captain Kenpachi Kujano's face as he heard more and more. It was Captain Hirako Shinji, in charge of the 5th Division, that spoke next. What about these Kage? They're supposed to be the toughest of the bunch, right? Isin shot the blonde captain a glance before clearing his throat and continuing. A Kage is the equivalent of a captain in strength, but they can range greatly. There are also a few Kage level ninja who are technically jonin. If possible, the Kenpachi's smile seemed to widen. There are ninja who specialize in a variety of different fields. Stealth, assassination, hand-to-hand combat, long-range and wide-range jutsu, weapons, illusions, infiltration. Some of them are truly masters of their craft and have spent their entire lives perfecting it. I'm unsure of how they will take being put through the academy. Most shinobi make their first kill by 13 or 14. It will be interesting to see how they interact with their unbloodied classmates. Very well, Shiba Taicho, you will assign one seated officer to watch over Uzumaki Naruto and ensure that as quickly as possible he is consoed and we are notified. Hi, Su Taicho. But that Yamamoto stood and exited the room. As Isin was walking through his division toward his office, he was contemplating who would be the best choice to guard Uzumaki. As far as he could tell, it was unclear how long the shinobi would live for. There was always the chance he could die in combat, so they couldn't leave it to simple patrols. His musings were halted when he heard a snoring coming from his office. Sliding open the door, he spotted his Lieutenant Matsumoto Ranjiku sleeping at her desk with an empty sake bottle by her head. An evil smirk creeping over his face, he slowly approached the snoozing Shinigami. "Oh, Ranjiku. Blah." The groggy Ranjiku replied, opening one eye. "I have a mission for you. But I'm sleeping." "Ranjiku, it's an easy assignment." Leaning back in her chair with a suspicious look. "What kind of mission?" Walking over to his cabinet, he pulled out a folder and then a smaller picture. Returning to her, he passed the small photo. "There's an important shinobi still living in the elemental nations. He must have some clout or something, cause the higher ups say he's important for the negotiations with the Shinobi Alliance. All you have to do, stick by him, and when he finally croaks, console him and let us know." Isin wandered over to a nearby window looking over the 10th Division compound. "This order is coming right from the Su Taicho, so don't screw up and make me look bad. If you do, I might just have to replace you with Toshiro." When he didn't hear a response, he turned only to find Ranjiku nowhere to be found. About to yell, he was stopped short by the door opening, revealing Ranjiku in a bright pink miniskirt with a loose shirt and sun hat complete with a bag of luggage. "Sorry, Captain, I needed to get my stuff together. A hot guy like this guy deserves only my best." But that she was off. Of course, she grabbed several bottles of sake she was apparently hiding in her desk. Ranjiku's Hunk Protection Diary Year. One day. 1. I entered the shinobi world with a regularly scheduled patrol and split off from them once they neared Konoha. Quickly familiarizing myself with the local hotspots and liquor stores, I moved on to locating my target. A straight 10-10 blonde hunk. I found he lived, surprisingly, in a rather modest mansion on top of the giant face mountain thing. It was quite a nice place with tons of trees and wildlife around it. Unfortunately, when I arrived, the mansion was empty. I marked the location on my map and went to make contact with a local outpost to see about acquiring a gigai for my downtime. Well, wouldn't you know it, after arranging things with the outpost, I spotted my target walking towards what must have been a training ground. Following slowly, I could only make out his back. He was tall and broad, both good signs. My only worry was that at the age of 50, he would have let himself go. Those thoughts were purged from my mind as he took off his coat. I quickly had to stop my drool from pooling at my feet. Are we sure this man is 50 years old? He looks no older than 30. I wonder if I could spin. Seducing him is vital to my mission success. Ranjiku's Hunk Protection Diary Year. One day. 3. My seduction plans will have to be put on hold. While following Naruto around, I discovered that he is not only a married man, but also a father. He has a handsome son named Boruto and a super cute daughter called Himawarmi. I finally found where his wife was hiding. Unfortunately, it was in the hospital. I'm not sure what's wrong with her, but it seems to be an injury from a past mission. Ranjiku's Hunk Protection Diary Year. 2 day. 45. The day I went with Naruto to visit Hinata like I usually do on the weekends. She hasn't gotten any better. The doctors say she'll soon lose vision in her right eye as well, but Naruto puts up a strong front. After passing the Hokage hat off to his protege Konohamaru to focus on Hinata and his grandchildren, Naruto has spent most of his time either with his wife, writing or training. I can tell his inability to help her is frustrating him, but the poison she was infected with was the result of an Aburum Kenjutsu that was stolen. Sakura says it's only a matter of time now. I'm worried. There's his wife's health and the rising tensions with the daimyo. It's not commonly known, but the daimyo don't like the Shinobi Alliance. It's made a number of things harder for them. Missions involving assassination, trade disruption and infiltration across borders have to pass through the Shinobi Council and be assessed for their implication and effects, resulting in a number of them being turned down. Combine that with the lack of proxy war via Shinobi conflicts and the daimyo are getting tired. Already the alliance has discovered several plots to sow dissent and conflict between the villages. If it doesn't stop soon the villages will have to act. Ranjiku's Hunk Protection Diary Year 3 Day 230. The Shinobi Samurai War has reached a standstill. The ninja from the smaller hidden villages hired by the daimyo have been pushed into what used to be aim. Casualties have been pretty light all things considering. Hopefully, a peace can be negotiated soon. Ranjiku's Hunk Protection Diary Year 3 Day 250. I performed a konso today. It's not the first konso I've done. I've taken to spending some time in the hospitals in Konoha, konsoing the souls of the shinobi there. Giving them comfort, telling them about soul society and the chances that their loved ones are waiting for them. Unfortunately, Hinata finally passed today. She was surrounded by her entire family and Naruto held her as she closed her eyes for the last time. I watched as her soul awoke from her body. I calmly greeted her and explained who I was. Surprisingly, she seemed happy, stating that she was looking forward to seeing her father and someone named Niji. Once alone with the body, Naruto let his tears out. It was horrible seeing such a strong man break down. I don't know if involuntarily or not, but his form was suddenly bathed in golden fire. His pupils changed, widening like a toad's, but also splitting like a cat's. Hinata also began to softly sob. At the sound Naruto looked up. Eyes widening, he shakily stood and approached his wife. It seemed in this state of power Naruto was able to see spirits. They embraced and he apologized for not finding a way to heal her. I left and gave them a private moment. When I returned, they seemed to have found some peace. Naruto had relaxed when he found that he could join her and many others after he had passed on. Not wanting to waste time, I consoed Hinata and stayed to talk with Naruto. He thanked me and left to grieve. Ranjiku's Hunk Protection Diary Year 3 Day 302. I'm currently out on the battlefield. The daimyos finally made an offensive move. They sent a mixed force of samurai and shinobi to destroy a number of farm and food producers. The alliance squad sent in response were ambushed by a large force of some kind of experimental shinobi. They were horrible, half-man half-monsters. Supposedly the description matches an enemy from the 4th Shinobi War called the White Zetsu. The possible presence of the White Zetsu caused Naruto to volunteer to lead the counterattack. Upon arriving at the battlefield, Naruto was immediately ambushed by these monstrosities. His team was overwhelmed and forced to retreat. Naruto has decided to send his team back to the Shinobi Alliance with new orders. He has stated that the White Zetsu clones could become a true threat if they, or any other of Kabuto's former experiments have been rediscovered. He is dedicated to tracking them down. I have no choice but to follow and to be honest I'd do it anyway. If I've learned anything from the last couple of years is that Naruto is truly a one-of-a-kind man. A hero if one has ever existed. Ranjiku's Hunk Protection Diary Year 4 Day 123. I helped Naruto pass on today. I'll admit I teared up. I think he'd been waiting for an opportunity to pass on ever since Hinata died. He just couldn't justify it unless his death would protect his loved ones. After dealing with the Zetsu clones found in a leftover base, he re-emerged from his hunt to find a large army of foreign samurai and ninja preparing to attack the Shinobi Alliance headquarters. After infiltrating their camp, he discovered that their backers had spent a ridiculous amount of money on buying multiple kinjutsu and summoning contracts from various traders and missing nin. Naruto was confident that the Shinobi Alliance could prevail against them, but what forced his hand was the loss of life the victory would cost. So instead he attacked the camp in a massive one-man assault. I have never seen such destruction or power in one man. The only thing I could compare it to are the stories told about the Sutaicho's release. Finally, after hours of enduring kinjutsu after kinjutsu and overwhelming numbers, Naruto finally succumbed to his injuries. By that point, a force of Alliance soldiers had arrived. They quickly dispatched the remaining enemies before finding the first Gokage, the legendary Golden Sage, sitting against a tree being comforted by his toad summons and dictating a final letter. I watched as his son Boruto ran to him and embraced the dying legend. After whispering some words into his heir's ear, Naruto turned to the crowd of ninja. His last speech was something I doubt any of them will forget. I look at you now, proud shinobi of the Alliance, comrades and warriors. My generation has ended, with my death I hope to take the cycle of hatred with me. When I see your families in the pure world, I will tell them how proud you have made them. I only ask that you remember us and strive to surpass us. Sitting before them was a living legend. A man who had left a mark in history so large that the 4th Hokage would be made secondary. The lone survivor in a field covered in destruction and bodies. As his famous electric blue eyes faded, they heard his final words. Never forget. Those that abandon their mission are trash, but those who abandon their comrades are worse than trash. I now return to the Gate 13. Only a few years older, but I feel as if I have seen decades pass. It'll be good to see Toshiro again. I should really go for a drink with Jin, it's been too long. A bright blinding light filled Naruto's vision. It slowly faded and instead of being on the battlefield he was sitting in a field. He looked around, slowly taking in his surroundings. It was an interesting change. Naruto understood that this was the pure world, the soul society that the Ranjiku woman had told him about. If what she said was true, Hinata was here. That thought alone made his heart skip a beat. A younger Naruto would have ran off and begun scouring this new land for his wife. Thankfully, he now had something that only old age could have given him. Patience and a touch of laziness. Instead of rushing off in a mad dash. He simply crossed his legs and began meditating. He spent time examining any changes to himself and his environment. The most obvious thing he noticed was that his yang chakra was gone. It wasn't diminished or unbalanced, it was simply gone and there was no negative consequences. As far as he could sense his entire chakra system had been left behind. A mystery for another day, he thought as he shifted his focus onto his sage mode. As he grew Naruto, like many other ninja, began to specialize. He took up the mantle of his late master Jiraiya's status as Toad Sage. He delved into Fuinjutsu like a starving man at a feast. Normally he had a hard time concentrating but the use of shadow clones, combined with the fact that while in sage mode, he was calm, at peace, and able to absorb information with a clearer head, he eventually became a master of both arts and a terrifying enemy to meet on the battlefield. The combination of his Biju cloak and sage mode created his ultimate form that led to his moniker the Golden Sage. Unlike his master, who specialized in combat sealing, Naruto and his apprentice Inogen focused on barrier and containment seals. There was a reason that the Shinobi Alliance prisons were rumored to be inescapable. With a sigh of relief, Naruto was able to sense an all-encompassing energy very similar to natural energy. It seemed though instead of the chakra produced by all living things, it seemed to be the yin chakra that everything emitted. He frowned, it would take some time to acclimate his sage mode, but Naruto was confident he could do it. He opened his eyes and looked to the sky. Wow, already past noon, guess I should look for some shelter. He stood and began stretching out his senses. He didn't have to wait long before 5 signatures came into his range moving at Chunin and Jounin speeds. The figures broke through the tree line and approached him. He put on his kindest smile, the one that made his grandchildren fess up to their pranks, and waited to be approached. Their leader, a very pretty young woman with a pair of oval red glasses, stepped forward and bowed. Uzumaki-san, my name is Yadamaru Lisa, lieutenant of the 8th Division. We are here to escort you to the Suriate. Well, it's a pleasure to meet you, Yadamaru-san. I assume you are a comrade of Ranjiku. A nod was all the response he got. Seeing the telltale signs of a stickler for the rules he decided to follow along. Very well. Lead on. As the group turned to leave, the Shinigami at the new front suddenly stopped and drew their swords. Lisa was obviously confused and moved her way to the front. Why are we stopping? She looked toward the edge of the clearing and slowly drew her blade. Standing in the shadows were 3 people in strange gray armor with scarves and hoods covering their faces. She pressed on undaunted, I don't know who you are, but you are interfering with the business of the Gate 13, please leave the area. The one with a strange half-cape, with only one arm visible, stepped forward to match her. She also noticed blade sheathed at his side, peeking out from the opposite hip. I'm afraid we can't do this. Our mission is to escort Uzumaki Naruto back with us. Do not worry, he will make his way to the Suriate in due time. She stepped forward again signaling her squad to fan out. She spoke without turning around, Uzumaki-san, please do not worry, we shall deliver you safely to the Su Taicho. She felt a hand on her shoulder. Turning to the grinning face of the rather handsome, she had to admit, blonde man. Well mama, Yadamaru-san, there's no need for a fight. Uzumaki-sama with all due res. Tengu. She was startled out of her explanation by the shift in tone. Naruto had stepped past her. Gone was the calm and fatherly demeanor, now there was a strength in his stance and an edge to his voice. Shockingly, all the masked individuals suddenly appeared before their target. That wasn't Shunpo, but it was so fast. I barely saw them move. Lisa was again confused when in her mind, potential assassins knelt before Uzumaki. She was about to protest and demand an explanation when they resumed speaking. Shadame, the council requests your presence. I'll bet they do. First second I get back and they're already shoving the paperwork at me. All of you stand up. Tengu. Tengu stuck out his hand. Naruto simply glanced at it, squinted and then in an instant enveloped the stranger in a massive bear hug. Laughing loudly the entire time. I missed you, you red-eyed bastard. The crowd was silent, the Shinigami were out of their depth. First they meet their target and the seated officers were skilled enough to sense the huge amounts of sealed Ryatsu, then these strange masked warriors appeared demanding their compliance. Their target seemed to know them and was able to even give them orders. All in all, Lisa could already feel a headache coming on. She resolved to borrow one of Shunsui's more spicy novels when she got back, that always helped her relax. Uzumaki-san, we are under direct orders from the Su Taicho. Your presence is required. Will I be able to leave after meeting your commander? Yes. Naruto took the time to observe Lisa. It was slightly unnerving, there was a weight to his gaze. Then Naruto gave one solid nod before turning back to Tengu. Tengu, you will accompany me to the meeting. The rest of you report back to the council, tell them I will make my way to them after meeting with the Su Taicho. Tengu will brief me on the current situation. Understood. The chorus of Hai answered him. Tengu, show your face. It seemed that Tengu was going to argue, but eventually reached up and removed his coverings, revealing him to be a man in his late 30s. Naruto, you're not even dead for a whole day, and already you're causing me trouble, dope. The insult was said with a small smirk which Naruto returned. Then let's get going, team. Chapter 3. Making an entrance. Cups of steaming tea were laid out around the table. The start of term meeting for the staff of Shino Academy was almost finished. The headmaster, Jinshiro Akakiba, sat at the head filing away the last of the paperwork. One last notice before we end the meeting. I was informed this morning that the Shinobi delegation will be beginning this term. They will arrive to be tested tomorrow. I wonder if there'll be anything impressive. The comment came from one of the advanced Keto instructors. After my visit with Saratobi-san, he confided in me that most likely they will send experts from different fields. This delegation is being sent to learn as much as they can and report back to their leaders. And we're just going to let them essentially spy on us. It's not as if they're simply graduating from the academy and leaving. Inshiro took a sip of tea. They will commit to service and undoubtedly will do their best to be able representatives. One of the newer instructors seemed unsure, should we extend any special treatment or make allowances for any deficiencies? In the interest of diplomatic ties. Inshiro shook his head, I don't think there will be a need. Once you see them in action, you'll be pleasantly surprised. Next. Marking down the lackluster test results, the test examiner for the day pulled out a fresh set of forms. When suddenly his preparations were interrupted by a loud shout. Yosh. Examiner-san, it is an honor for me to demonstrate my youth to you. I will not disappoint. Standing in front of him was a man with possibly the thickest eyebrows he had ever seen. He was dressed in a standard kimono, but instead of dull brown, it was a deep green. Yes, well, thank you for applying, Lee-san. You are coming from, I'm sorry, could you tell me what district Yamagakure is? I've never heard of it before. Yosh. Of course, it is the Shinobi enclave in District 10. The examiner stopped writing, looked up at Lee, coughed and excused himself. Minutes passed by, Lee's bright smiling never wavering. Finally, the door slid open and the examiner re-entered, now accompanied. Greetings, Lee-san, my name is Kaihan, I'm an instructor and will be sitting in on your examination. No trouble, sensei, just another person to demonstrate the fire of my youth. The two staff members exchanged wary glances. Let us begin, Lee-san. Do you know how to channel your Reiatsu? Hi, shall I begin? Please do. Lee then widened his stance and held his hands out, palms facing forward. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Slowly the examiners felt his Reiatsu begin to release into the room. They were surprised, his power started at a fourth-year student, the only problem was that it kept climbing, it eventually settled at a lower-rank seated officer. Needless to say, Lee's observers were wide-eyed. He quickly bowed, my apologies, sensei, I've always had difficulty outputting my energy, it's a difficulty that has followed me from my time alive. Yes. That's fine, Lee-san. Let's continue. We'll test your hand-to-hand skills versus Ryo-san here. Please do your best, I will end the spar when I feel I have seen your capabilities. May I ask what level of spar we will be having? Kaihan was confused by his wording, please show your full range of skills, Lee-san, we need accurate information to properly place you. She felt a chill crawl down her back at the obvious excitement in Lee's eyes. Next. Kaihan was sorting papers with her new assistant. Ryo was going to be taking a trip to the Academy Medical Bay. Just thinking of that, frankly, beating Lee gave to Ryo made her wince. The door slid open gently and a man with dark skin, white hair and a sucker between his lips walked in. Hey, he threw his hand up while greeting them, far too casually in her opinion. Hello Omboy-san, if you're ready, we'll begin. She was slightly more prepared for Omboy's release, it reached mid-level seated officer, his Hakuto was also very competent. Now time for the Zanjutsu test. Omboy looked up at them and pulled the lollipop out his mouth. Great. Let's rock. Omboy shrugged off the top of his kimono, revealing a well-muscled upper body with a number of thin long scars wrapping around his sides. He picked up a wooden practice blade and gave it a few test swings before slipping into a series of fast and deadly-looking katas. I hope these swords are well sanded. What if a splinter gets in my eye? Then I start stumbling and accidentally break your arm, then you get me kicked out of the academy, my boss fires me, and I have to live on the streets as a shoe shine. Aihin wasn't sure how to respond, instead, she simply signaled for them to begin. She was afraid to call for the next applicant. In the last 3 hours, she had witnessed a student move faster than a lieutenant, a swordsman dance around the examiner like he was facing a child, a man and woman who both could cast a beginner Kido with an amazing amount of control and power, a dark-haired applicant who never made a sound other than replying to questions during the entire exam, and to top it off, that one had the power level of a lieutenant. The most normal shinobi had been a tired-looking man who had scored a perfect score on the written portion. She was about done with these strange people. Thankfully there was only one left. Next. She steeled herself. The door slid open and in walked a tall blonde man with the deepest blue eyes she had ever seen. He gave a gentle smile and walked forward before bowing his head. "Good afternoon, Examiner-san." Somewhat entranced by his face, she was having a hard time focusing on what he was saying. Hello, Uzumaki-san. Please. Channel my Ryatsu. YS. Defying her expectations, instead of focusing on his inner energy, he pulled a letter out of his clothes and handed it over. After taking it, she saw the mark of the first division inked onto the back. Stunned, she swiftly opened the letter and was surprised to find an order, signed by the Sutaicho himself. It was a short missive, ordering that Uzumaki Naruto be put in all the same classes as his fellow shinobi applicants. Did the Sutaicho know the shinobi would blow past our expectations? I guess that will be all, Uzumaki-san, have a nice day. Thank you very much, Examiner-san. Look, there they are. I heard the blonde was some kind of warlord when he was alive. My friend overheard one of the senseis saying he met with the Sutaicho personally. More and more whispers flew throughout the halls of the academy following the opening orientation. After being introduced as members of the diplomatic envoy, reactions to the shinobi presence had varied. Walking through the halls toward their first classes was a smiling blonde who stood at a towering 6'3", behind him on either side of his shoulders was a man with black hair and an empty sleeve, his counterpart had his hair pulled back into a ponytail with a goatee. Needless to say, reactions had been mixed. Most students in the academy were young, or at least looked young. Most soul reapers didn't truly start aging until their second century or so. For many of their peers, it was hard to look at them without feeling as though they should treat them as one would an older community member or even a more experienced comrade. For the boys, this translated into curiosity, awe, jealousy and some even contempt, especially among the older students who felt that their appearance didn't change their place on the bottom of the school's picking order. The girls of the academy had already begun to draw battle lines. They were firmly entrenched into two different camps. One half of the girls, mostly the more advanced students, were smitten by the older gentlemen who, in their words, would know how to treat a real woman. Needless to say, all 5 of them quickly gained fans, with Sasuke and Naruto being the main figureheads and Amoy, Shikamaru and C fighting for third place. Lee's popularity remained at a minimum until someone saw him doing a warm-up in his workout shorts and no shirt one morning and took pictures. The remaining half saw them as dads more than anything, preferring to keep their attention focused on the boys their age. Sakura on the other hand was swarmed by girls as soon as she entered the female dormitories. Asking questions about the men she accompanied, if she dyed her hair. It seemed as though she was easily falling into the moth older sister role she was already familiar with. The only trouble she encountered was when a certain one-armed man showed up to check in. Knock, knock. Asuki, a 4th-year student specializing in Bakudo, paused in her studying and got up from the prefect desk she was at. As she opened the door, her whole world narrowed. Before her, with his hair brushing along the side of his face, was one of the most handsome and elegant-looking men she had ever seen. She simply stared, memorizing every detail she could. This was the famous Uchiha Sasuke. The Dark Angel. Asuki only realized he was speaking when her admiration of his lips was interrupted by their movement. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" The man sighed in resignation. "Yes, I'm looking for Sakura-san." "Oh, of course, please take a seat, I'll go get her." As she turned to walk down to Sakura's room, she noticed most of the other rooms were open with girls peeking out and observing their guest. A few seconds later and Sasuke was already tired of the whispers he could hear throughout the hall. Then his pink-haired savior emerged. He quickly got up and walked toward her. You could almost feel the tension. Sasuke, despite his masterful skills and legendary stealth capabilities, was never very good at disguise or impersonation. That was Naruto's field of expertise. Thus, in very typical Sasuke awkwardness, he decided to make his availability very clear. "Good afternoon, Sakura-hime, my beautiful wife and mother of my children, I missed you. I wanted to know if you join me for a walk around the campus." "Of course, Asuke-kun, my wonderful husband and father of my daughters. I would love to join you." But that the two Uchiha walked out, leaving behind a mixture of broken hearts, disbelieving stares and determined seductress. Classes began with many anxious to see which classes were graced with the delegates' presence. They were seen in the mandatory history course and were noticed to be switching classes, going from one year to the next, seemingly changing each week. It was only a month in and they had all moved into the 4th-year classes and seemingly settled. Each of the delegates had found strange niches for themselves among the student body. Amoy could typically be found relaxing in the Zanjutsu dojo, typically reserved for the older Zanjutsu enthusiasts. He was quickly challenged to prove himself. After beating 3 senior students with a branch he picked up outside, the Zanjutsu lounge became his place to hang out. Amoy would occasionally give advice out to people having practiced duels in exchange for sweets and was quickly given the moniker Candy Sensei. The sales of lollipops from the local sweet shops skyrocketed. He made a home in the library and Keto practice ranges, reading the many books on technique and history available. The library was suddenly much more popular place for quiet studying or seasighting. The Keto experts were enthralled by his deep understanding of energy and incredible precision at casting and detection. Rock Lee had quickly found a suitable clearing on the academy grounds and procured some stumps. He could be found working out every morning, afternoon and night. He quickly acquired his own disciples, mostly when they noticed how many girls came to watch Lee practice his youth. Shikamaru very rarely interacted with other students. His perfect tests and essays led to being invited for discussions with the teachers. This transformed into shogi tournaments on the weekends. When asked why he never interacted with the students, the only response was mumbled excuses, "They've got too much energy, and my wife would kill me." Sasuke was only ever seen in the company of his wife Sakura. In class they would sit together, at lunch they would eat together. The couple was dubbed the Raven and Flower. During other times he was a ghost, neither seen nor heard, unless Naruto called for him, then you could see the two eating on a roof somewhere. Sakura split her time between the library, giving advice to her dorm mates, and volunteering in the medical wing. The nurses there were grateful and surprised to learn Sakura was a fully trained doctor who simply needed to readjust to new healing techniques. When Sakura was working, the medical wing was renamed the Blossom Ward. Finally, Naruto had, seemingly overnight, charmed the entire school. His natural charisma, skill and understanding won him fans among everyone. In class, he would be studious and often asked others for help. During practical classes he was a kind teacher and excellent instructor. The academy staff found him quick-witted and sometimes forgot he wasn't a colleague. The other students saw him as the ultimate senpai. Shikamaru hated it, if only because the room he shared with Naruto was never quiet, with people coming and going all day. Naruto was extremely excited. He had a year to spend reuniting with his loving wife Hinata and to see so many of his old friends. When he had arrived back at the first division to speak with the Su Taicho, he was met with the biggest surprise of all. Flashback. The large ceremonial doors to the first division opened. Naruto and 2 first division members escorted him through. He was curious to meet this captain commander. The few stories he'd been told when he asked Fukatechu painted the picture of a man who was chosen by the Soul King to forge a society out of chaos. The Su Taichu had single-handedly established rule over Soul Society and has led the Gate since its inception. He couldn't help but admire that, being Hokage for 20 years and Gokage for 10 years after that was enough stress to put him in an early grave. He rounded a corner and continued to follow his guides. Before they reached the end of the hall, he heard a sharp gasp and a strangled voice say Minato. Turning quickly, Naruto locked eye with a wizened old face with a grey goatee. His heart skipped a beat, the air seemed too still. Gigi. Smiling softly, Naruto finished preparing for another day. It had been 6 months since he and his companions had started at the academy. They had finally settled into the 4th-year curriculum, deciding it had enough information on medium skills that it would be the best place to be observing from. The day was especially important as the 4th-year students would be given their asauchi and attempt to make contact with their Zanpakuto. Most students are expected to spend the next 2 years becoming familiar with their Zanpakuto. The goal is to actually speak and see your inner spirit. The prodigious goal is to have achieved Shikai release by graduation, thus automatically gaining the notice of the higher-ups. Naruto walked over to the bunk that sat across from him. "Shika, time to wake up. Class starts in an hour." The lump of blankets and pillows didn't even budge. Shikamaru didn't even seem to be breathing. Without even a wisp of smoke or the sound of a pop, a shadow clone materialized beside Naruto. It then was enveloped in cloud. The cloud dispersed, revealing a middle-aged woman with dirty blonde hair done up in 4 ponytails. The Tamari clone was also dressed in a black nightgown. Giving the clone a thumbs up, Naruto left his room and made his way towards the Zanjetsu hall. Greeting his friends and associates as he passed them, smiling at the girls and accepting the small gifts of food and compliments gracefully, he finally made it to the classroom. Waiting there near the door, the rest of the nin group were chatting amicably. "Good morning. Everyone ready?" The chorus of responses followed, with Lee stepping forward. Yosh. "I cannot wait to be able to bring my Zanpakuto back to show Tenten. Before I left she begged me to learn everything I could." "Wait, where's Shikamaru?" Just then a groan could be heard. From around the corner came a shambling mass in the vague shape of Shikamaru. His eyes were baggy, his feet dragged, and his shoulders were so hunched they covered his ears. "Shikamaru, are you okay?" Sakura seemed concerned, not overly, but still somewhat concerned. Shikamaru turned his head and simply glared through clenched up eyes at Naruto. Temari will be hearing about this, and so will Hinata. But that declaration, he slumped against a wall and began snoring. Soon they were all seated inside the classroom. All the students were in attendance, no one was going to miss out on this. The usual class layout had the shinobi seated together in a group with their various other friends and acquaintances forming around the circle. The instructor entered, followed by 2 assistants each carrying a large case. The cases were placed at the head of the class, behind the instructor. After quieting down, the instructor addressed her students. As you all are aware, today is a very important day. Today you shall take another step towards becoming a fully fledged Shinigami. Excited muttering filled the classroom. When I call your name, you shall come up and receive your Asauchi. Once everyone has collected theirs, we will begin the first of many Jinzo sessions. The goal is for you to reach your inner world by the time you graduate. Do not be discouraged, many Soul Reapers take years before they even meet their Zanpakuto spirit. Do not rush this, let it come naturally. The lecture completed, the instructor began reading off names. Once the class was once again seated and ready, they began the long process of trying to contact their inner spirit. Chapter 4. Shadows and Toads. Clouds. Shikamaru saw clouds. A blue sky, a gentle breeze and lots of clouds. Shikamaru considered the fact that the last thing he remembered was going to bed in his dorm. He looked back to the clouds and easily ignored that fact and went to sleep. It was the smoke that woke him, at some point the bright blue sky had turned dark and stars had emerged. He could hear the breathing from beside him and smell the smoke. Lazily, he opened one eye and looked to the left. Sitting with its back against a tree was a wrinkled old man. He had a thin mustache, deep bags under his eyes and a ring of hair with a bald top. A plump face with some freckling and a scar running from the middle of his chin, straight down to his Adam's apple. The two made eye contact. "Could I bother you for a smoke?" Shikamaru asked. "No bother at all," was the subdued response. Shikamaru had turned back towards the sky and could only hear the rustling of cloth. A hand-rolled cigarette was placed in front of his face. He wordlessly sat up and turned, grabbing the smoke and bringing it to his mouth in the process. He noted his companion was in the process of lighting his own cigarette, then gratefully let him light his own. They both exhaled at the same time, letting the smoke float and cloud the night sky. "I gotta admit, I was kind of worried when I started trying to make it in here." "Oh? Why?" "I was worried my Zanpakuto was gonna be an annoying busybody. Might yell at me to get off my ass and do something." No, I'm afraid I'm a bit too old to be doing that. I prefer to sit in the shade more than anything. I've been told that hearing your name is the hardest part of the whole process. I'm pretty sure I'm the first of my group to get in here. Pretty surprising, never thought of myself as the guru type. If I'm being honest, it should be a bit harder. But I just don't have the energy." "Yeah, I can sympathize." The old man exhaled a smoke ring, then frowned, obviously deep in thought. The moments ticked by, neither seemed upset by this. "I guess I should ask you at least one question." "Then ask away." Suddenly Shikamaru was on a cliff. From the vantage point he finally got a look at his inner world. It wasn't that big, it had a large stream, some dense forest, and what looked to be a comfortable cabin set beside it. The perfect place for cloud watching. He was startled by the sound of a cry from behind him. He quickly turned and saw his wife Temari dangling from the edge of the cliff. He moved to grab her but was interrupted by another shout. Naruto, missing his artificial arm, was slowly slipping from his grip on the cliffside. Shikamaru began looking around trying to think of a solution. "There's no time for strategy. Choose now." The voice came from the tree further up the cliff. The old man sat there, a smoke bud dangling from his lips. "I can't choose between the..." Suddenly they both cried out and Shikamaru acted on instinct for the first time in many years. He lunged for his wife, grabbing her hand just as she lost her hold. His relief was shattered when he heard the sound of Naruto's body hitting the bottom of the cliff. He looked and saw the broken body of his friend while holding his wife to his chest. He blinked. Clouds. Shikamaru saw clouds. A blue sky, a gentle breeze and lots of clouds. What was the point of that? To see if you could do what was best for yourself, to see if that instinct and selfishness hadn't disappeared. "I don't want my wielder to go out of his way to make trouble just for the sake of responsibility. I needed to make sure you could still put our family first. You are no longer shinobi, you need to understand that this world is different. You need to think about the king piece." The old man chuckled. "Exactly. I forgot to introduce myself." The two once again locked eyes. "I'm Kumotsukuru, cloud-making warlord, come back for a game of shogi sometime." Sakura opened her eyes, the air tasted of disinfectant, she could smell fresh coffee wafting in through the open door. She was lying in a bed. It was obviously a patient's bed, the linen was older, and there was a bedside table with a glass of water. She took a hesitant drink, then examined the room. It was a bland white, the window showed an almost identical view of the outside of the Lease General Hospital. She took in the view for a few seconds before noticing a blinking light near her bedside. It was the nurse call button. She hesitated but pushed it anyways. It gave a soft click, otherwise there was no sound. It only took a minute or so before Sakura could hear footsteps coming down the hall. After having 3 children, she had a lot of time to reflect on her life while raising them. She had to confront her own childhood to learn what she could expect. That was when she first noticed her inner self, though it had mostly receded as she grew more confident and sure of herself. As soon as the concept of the soul sword was explained in depth to her, she expected it to, obviously, be this inner self personified. It was that presumption that explained her immense shock when, instead of a pink-haired bruiser, a well-dressed teenage boy walked into her room. Hello. The boy, dressed in a standard nurse uniform, a short-sleeved top, buttoned across to the shoulder with pants and clean simple shoes, he had green hair and unnaturally pink eyes. Without making a sound, he smiled and nodded. He walked forward and gave her the clipboard attached to the foot of the bed. My patient history. It was a list of nearly every injury she had ever received. Emotional, physical, spiritual, it was all on there. At the very end of the list was a single note writing in flowing handwriting. Prescribed treatment. A fight. Ready. Sakura was about to ask the young man what that meant, but noticed he had already left. Ready. Set. Go. The feminine yell only registered to her a second before the wall her bed was resting again was destroyed by monster's kick. Sakura was already on the opposite wall, poised for a return strike. The debris and dust cleared to reveal a teenage girl with identical pink hair to Sakura herself. Time to see if you still got it now that you're old, hag. Before Sakura could blink, the mini pink monster, who she noticed was dressed in a smaller version of a doctor's uniform, was already in front of her winding up a fist. The windows on every floor of the hospital shattered simultaneously. Out front, watching all this go by with a stoic face was the nurse. He was sitting on a bench, calmly eating a boxed lunch as screams could be heard echoing from within. Just as he finished up the last of his lunch, the doors to the hospital were kicked off their hinges, out stumbled 2 figures coated in dust, blood and makeup. The nurse shrugged it off and made his way toward the 2. As he neared he could finally make out their conversation. And then, once you're out of the way, I'm gonna buy one of those maid outfits and when he gets home, you will do no such thing. You're too young to be thinking of stuff like that. Well, one of us had to. We're in the afterlife for crying out loud. Let's live a little. I want to see our husband on his hands and knees begging as we slowly. Whatever she was about to say was stopped by a fist clocking her in the face. Her blushing attacker seemed to have finally had enough. A hand was put in front of her face, turning she noticed the nurse was smiling at her. He bowed before moving to the downed pink head. He clapped his hands together before putting them on the girl's shoulders. Slowly her wound started to seal up, the green healing energy circulating across her entire body. Once he was done, he made his way to Sakura and did the same thing. Thanks, I have to ask, what was that all about? It was her mini-me that answered. I needed to fight you for the right to be Sasuke's wife, and you've won this match. Be ready though, the rematch will be soon, and next time I shall pre. Her declaration was stopped short by a lunchbox being shoved into her face. The food instantly got her attention, and she dropped down on the spot and dug in. Another box was handed to Sakura who joined them on the floor. So why are there 2 of you? I thought I was only supposed to have 1 spirit. Winnie spoke up with a mouth full of food. It's super rare but not unheard of. Basically, we're your 2 sources of strength. I'm your power and physical strength, the shinobi side. Nurse over here is your intelligence and inner strength, your healer side. Okay, that explains it then, so what are your names? The 2 spirits looked at each other, Minnie nodded once, and the nurse turned to face her. He smiled slightly and whispered, H plus Ringu Akuma, healing demon mirror. Lee had been having a wonderful dream. It was his usual favorite, he was on top of the greatest mountain in the world. He had just climbed it with his hands tied behind his back. Waiting at the top had been Guy-sensei, his son Metal, and his granddaughters Gold and Silver. They were about to start a round of sparring when they all disappeared. Lee looked around the mountaintop, wondering why he hadn't woken up. Then he heard the gong, it was deep and echoed across the mountain range. The peak Lee was on vibrated, he got down and pressed his ear to the ground. It vibrated again, but this time was more distant. Whatever it is, it's below me. He remembered seeing a cave on his way up. He quickly ran down the mountainside. Finding the cave easily he entered. His first obstacle was a solid rock wall. Engraved on it was the word strength, Lee easily broke through it. Next came an iron wall marked resolve. A steel wall marked power. Then finally he came to a wooden wall. This one was different, it was far smaller and had a single kanji painted in ink, acceptance. He attempted to punch the door. It did nothing, his kicks were ineffective, throwing rocks didn't work. For what felt like hours, Lee smashed and hit, eventually he was exhausted and bruised. He couldn't understand, his youth had never failed to at least do something. Even against his friend Gaara all those years ago, his kicks cracked the sand armor. He had seen what Guy-sensei accomplished against Madara Uchiha. The power of youth was endless. Yet that wasn't entirely true. Due to his chakra deficiency, he was never able to entirely unlock his chakra. Only by manipulating it inside body had he been able to be an effective fighter. It was a sore spot that he was glad his granddaughters were free of. As he took a moment to catch his breath, he heard a jingle and turned to see a man sitting by the wall. When did he arrive? You cannot break the gate with your fist. A man dressed like the fire temple monks Lee had seen over the years. What do you mean? It is just wood. I've broken things like it thousands of times. The monk hummed quietly. I will give you a hint. This wall cannot be broken by any blow, it cannot be splintered or cracked, burnt or cut. It only be opened. Lee adopted one of the special thinking poses taught by Guy Sensei. He got into a one-armed handstand and furrowed his large brows. If it is a door, not a wall. He saw the monk give a small nod. Then where is the key? Another nod. Good. I will tell you this, the key can only be found by someone who can project their energy and cover the entire door. Lee quickly flipped back to his feet and rushed to the door, putting both his hands flat against it. Yosh. Here I go. UAI. Lee began pushing his energy into the wood. After only a couple seconds he realized the energy only covered a small area near his palms. Lee simply grit his teeth and continued, almost a full hour passed. Lee never stopped pumping energy out. HR tried different methods, patterns, none of it worked. After the second hour, he began to get frustrated, the third hour annoyed, and by the end of the fourth hour he was angry. The entire time the monk sat and watched. I don't understand, nothing works, I know my inner spirit is inside, but I can't reach it. Why? The monk opened his bag and pulled a small tea set out, before long the scent of green tea filled the cavern. The monk poured 2 cups and looked toward the tired Lee. Perhaps, a break is in order. Come, join me for a cup. Lee nodded, too tired to refuse, and made his way over before plopping himself down in front of the stranger. Gratefully taking the cup, he slowly sipped the tea. It was simple and soothing, just what he needed to counter his tense frame. Thank you for the tea. Thank you for sharing it with me. You have great passion, Lee, great inner strength. Yet, you are hampered by it as much as you are strengthened. The monk poured another cup, calmly waiting for Lee's response. The bushy-browed brawler could only stare at his new friend. Not enough. That may be true, but I have nothing but my strength. Without it, I cannot fight, cannot protect. Nothing. The monk smiled sadly at Lee. For any jokes that could be made at your expense, sometimes you truly are too rigid. Setting his tea down, the monk reached forward taking one of Lee's bandaged hands in his own. Carefully looking at the bruises and long-healed scars he softly smiled. Lee, you must not forget. This is no longer the realm of shinobi. You no longer use chakra. Tell me, if you no longer have chakra, then why do you still have problems molding your energy? Lee set his cup down and turned toward the door. Lee balled his fists and felt the energy ebb and flow. Except, this time he really examined his energy. Watched, in his mind's eye, how it moved through the tenketsu under his skin. Lee paused, his tenketsu were different. Instead of hundreds of equally sized pressure points, there were thousands of minuscule points and 2 huge release points in his wrists. What shocked him even more was that the more he circulates the energy, the easier it became. While he was alive, Lee had to struggle to move his inner power, it was like pushing thick mud with his hands. Now it was sand, blowing around in a storm. Lee simply sat, saying nothing, playing like a child with his newfound ability. He stood and calmly walked over to the door. Placing one hand on it, he called up the lessons from the Shinigami Academy and from Guy Sensei a lifetime ago. He centered himself and then built up the reserves, letting them dam up inside his center. Then he unleashed the flood out through his wrist. The energy jumped onto the door, eagerly, completely covering it. Lee had never felt such a rush outside of opening the gates. The door opened without a sound, just calmly swung open. Behind it, there was no secret dojo. Nothing like what Lee was expecting. It was small rock garden, a simply hut and a small koi pond. The monk walked into the small home and sat on the bench. He smiled once again. I'm very happy for you, Lee. Welcome to my home. You've learned the first lesson, now it is time to unlock your full potential. The spiritual energy locked inside you has waited a long time to come out. The monk motioned to the stool across from him. Mido Guy taught you how to use your heart and your fists. Now I will teach you to use your spirit. Sit, it is time for your first lesson. I will be your teacher. The monk slowly stood and shut his robe, revealing a scarred and toned body. I am Kizuado Yama, the scarred mountain. But that declaration, the wooden door closed. Please stop doing that. The finger that had been poking into his forehead for the past 5 minutes withdrew. Sasuke took a deep breath and opened one of his eyes, taking in his surroundings in an instant. It was a dark living room, standard mats and paper walls. A moon shone through the window. Chirping crickets could be heard and the occasional cry of a bird. Squatting above Sasuke was a boy in a black jumpsuit. On the shoulder was the Uchiha clan symbol. The figure laughed and then ran out of the room. Sasuke slowly sat up. He was in the old Uchiha compound. It had been demolished during Pain's attack, and rather than rebuilding the entire walled-off district, Sasuke had instead built a modest mansion and opened the rest of the land to Konoha. He made his way out into the garden. He could hear the quiet giggling of the strange child in the trees on the other side of the rock garden. "Please come out, I'd like to get this done with quickly." His request was only met with more giggles. Sasuke let loose a long-suffering sigh. He was having flashbacks to his own children. He quickly shunshined into the tree where the voice came from. He turned his bored gaze to where the child was hiding, only to find a crow. Walking on the branch was a large crow. It seemed more interested in the bark than Sasuke. He frowned and cast his senses to track his pint-sized target, but the boy had disappeared. Ouch. Sasuke snapped his head to the side, holding his stinging ear, coming face to face with the crow. The crow squawked and flew out of the tree, landing on the fence leading to the back of the compound. Sasuke dropped down and walked toward the fence. Just as he entered arm's length, the bird flew off again. It flew into the private clan graveyard, the graveyard that Sasuke had spent hours tending and sitting in when he was younger. He didn't want to go back but steeled himself and entered. The silence was just as lonely as he remembered. The rows of stone gave off a haunting atmosphere. He saw the crow perched on the small shrine's roof. This time when he got close, the bird flew down and landed on his shoulder. He heard the giggling again, coming from inside the shrine. Sitting in the middle of the floor was the young boy. He turned around and Sasuke's heart stopped. It was Itachi. A young Itachi, probably around 9 or 10, before he had joined Anbu. The crow flew and landed in front of child Itachi, who started to laugh and pet the bird. Sasuke's heart restarted but constricted painfully. Seeing this vision of Itachi, so innocent and unburdened, placed a great weight on his heart. It brought to mind all the hardships and pain Itachi had faced. Even now, years later, Sasuke still mourned his brother. Both the one that grew up to act as a monster and the one sitting in front of him. A new crow settled itself on his shoulder, except this one spoke. "You have not moved on." "I have. I buried my brother long ago. The vision before me says otherwise. This vision is a sad hope and a painful dream. I wish it was gone." The scene before him changed. Now Itachi was older, closer to 15. He was sitting down with a girl holding her hand and softly smiling. The shadows flickered and now Itachi held a small baby, holding hands with small boy, hugging a young man, laying on the ground, surrounded by his family, smiling softly as he closed his eyes and his wrinkled face slackened. Sasuke was crying. He didn't draw attention to it. "My brother deserved better." The crow sighed, a strange sight from a bird, and turned to Sasuke. "You are correct, yet you must accept that he did not. His soul has entered reincarnation and will one day be born again. You can only hope that he receives his dues in the next life." Suddenly, the crow's eyes sparked into life with Sharingan spinning wildly. "If you wish to know my name, you must bury Itachi, once and for all." And Sasuke blinked. His surroundings had changed. They now stood before an open grave, and laying before him was the body of Itachi, an older Itachi, with a soft smile and a face free of guilt. Hesitantly, Sasuke bent down and cradled his brother's body and began his task. It was many hours late. Sasuke had gone through more emotional shifts than he could remember. Anger, fear, sadness, doubt all came to the surface. The grave had been filled in, and Sasuke had hand-carved a tombstone for his brother. Once again, the crow landed on his shoulder. It was an oddly comforting presence. "Now we can focus on the future and let the past rest." The crow's eyes once again swirled into pinwheels. "My name is Shinchona Saishin, watchful scarlet spirit." Naruto was having his favorite dream. What that dream consisted of had changed over the course of his life. When he was a young child, he dreamt of a mother and father holding him while he ate ramen in a warm home. When he was a teenager, he dreamt of sitting with Team 7 at Ichiraku's, wearing the Hokage hat. Near the end of his life, Naruto's favorite dream had changed once again. It would be him, sitting in his office, looking out over the village. The door would open and his family would come in, and they would enjoy a helping of ramen takeout for lunch. Naruto thought that's how his dream would play out. He was in his office, waiting for Hinata to open the door. He heard the creak of the hinges, turned around and then frowned. The door was open. He could see the hallway leading out into the waiting area, but there was no one there. Croak. Naruto nearly tripped over his office chair at the sudden sound. Sitting on his desk, croaking at him, was a small toad. It was a soft red with black accents running and 2 lines up its back, down to its forehead. "Can I help you?" No response. The little one just croaked again and jumped off the desk and out the window. It landed on the awning outside and turned to look at the former Hokage, who without a second thought, stepped out of his window and was committed to following the strange amphibian he had just met. "What can you say?" "Naruto likes toads." So it went, playing a strange version of Leapfrog, Leap Toad. Naruto thought, all the way up to the Hokage monument. He let the toad jump onto his head, the way Gamakichi used to when they were both a lot smaller. "Suo or you my Zanpakuto?" Cause, I'll be honest, I was kind of expecting you to be a version of Kurama or something. Naruto was then blinded by a massive smoke cloud, coughing, he cleared some of it with his hand. In front of him there was no small toad, but a medium-sized one, its skin a bright yellow, with red markings around its eyes and black accents running up his arms and down his back. It was wearing a red haori with black flames running along the bottom hem. It looked young, probably an adolescent close to adulthood, if Naruto's experience with his summons was any example. What drew Naruto's eye most was the cloak and the massive scroll on its back. The toad looked like Naruto after he came back from his sage training, if Naruto was a toad. Naruto and the toad stood there, staring at each other for quite a while. Their contest of wills was interrupted by Naruto dozing off due to sheer boredom, only to be awaked by a large tongue knocking him onto his back. "Oi. What's the big idea?" His demand went unanswered. The toad had seemingly become bored with Naruto and had made its way into a nearby pond where it sat in the water contently with only its eyes poking above the surface. Still staring into space, the bar pupils gleaming in the sunlight. Naruto was getting a little impatient. Surely, after all the time spent with Kurama, he would be able to communicate with his inner soul. The younger Naruto would have gotten frustrated and probably tried to beat the toad into speaking with him, but, as his wife sought fit to remind him, he was not young. Instead of yelling or fist fighting, Naruto plopped down on the edge of the water and closed his eyes. After many days of practicing, Naruto came to the sad realization that he couldn't regain his sage mode. The problem was that he learned how to attune himself to nature. Nature was heavily geared towards yang chakra. It was why you had to be weary of losing your physical form, the potent chakra would overwhelm it. Imagine Naruto's surprise, when he sat down to meditate he could feel the energy around him begin to sink into his system. He was so unprepared that he jolted and fell into the pond. When he resurfaced, he could have sworn the toad was laughing at him. Smirking to himself, Naruto quickly swam over and clambered onto the toad, chuckling at the annoyed croaking. Settling himself down, he went back into his meditative state. Slowly opening his senses once again, Naruto felt the flow of energy in his inner world surround him. He expected it to feel like Kurama's chakra, instead it resembled the nature chakra of Mount Myaboku and seemed to be inhabiting every part of this world. Naruto began absorbing the Reiatsu slowly, at the same level as when he was first learning Sage Mode. It was like tree walking, once you've done it, you never really forget. It took him a few hours too and he had to restart several times. His fifth attempt would be his last. One moment he was gathering Reiatsu in his core and the next it all snapped into place. Naruto's eyes snapped open, revealing yellow orbs with a thick black bar for a pupil. Around his eyes, his usual red outline appeared with a new addition. Two red line continued down his cheeks, very reminiscent of Jiraiya's own trademark look. "Yada. It's good to be back. Then I guess you can get off my head." Naruto blinked, the feminine voice had not come from him. He looked down and two sets of toad eyes met. He quickly hopped off and onto the bank of the pond. He plastered on his best smile and said hello. The toad was not impressed. "Wipe that smile off your face, you idiot. It's time to be serious," the definitely female toad chastised. Naruto's exaggerated smile slowly fell into a simple smirk and his eyes sharpened. "Okay, I'm Naruto, nice to meet you." The toadess pulled herself out of the water and sat beside him. "You know, I hate that damn fox." Naruto immediately took offense. "Hey now, Kurama was a friend of mine, I'd appreciate it if you didn't insult him." The toadess actually huffed at him. She blew his complaint off. "That fox may have been your friend, but he took too much of you for me to ever be happy about his presence." "What do you mean, he took too much of me?" "I mean just that. His presence defined so much of your life that you only later on found your true talents." Naruto shook his head. "I don't understand what you mean. I don't think Kurama changed me that much. I'm sure that my childhood would have been happier, but I think I was always destined to be an unpredictable knucklehead." The toad sighed in response. "If you had been allowed to grow up without the burden of the 9 tails, you would have discovered your aptitude for sealing early on. That would have led to an apprenticeship with Jiraiya-sensei much earlier. The Kyuubi took up too much of you, the tree you didn't emerge until years later." Naruto turned his gaze to the sky. "Are you talking about my sage training?" He heard his companion shift in place. "Yes. You would have become Konoha's resident seal master. You would still have become Hokage just much later, after inspiring an entire generation of young ninja." Naruto shook his head. "The fourth war would have changed all that. Without me holding the Kyuubi, who knows what would have happened." He heard the equivalent of a toad sigh before her next response. "That is also true. I suppose my dreams for you would only have worked in a perfect world. You, out of all your friends and family, have always known how to move past your limitations. I have no doubt you know your soul best. In fact," she turned to Naruto, eyes sparkling with pride, "you already know my name." Naruto's eyes widened at the statement. She was so certain that he knew himself that well. He stood up and closed his eyes, immersing himself in his surroundings. He could feel his Zanpakuto sitting before him on the ground. He wasn't surprised to find her filled with sage chakra, same as him. He looked at her through his senses, slowly getting a feel for the differences between them. His eyes snapped open, his face breaking into his classic smile. Akina Seiji, cheerful sage. Chapter 5. Friendly infiltration. Sakura was used to the stares. Back when she was still the head of the hospital, the new doctors and nurses tended to stare for their first couple of weeks. By the time she was retired, anytime she came into work to teach there were stares, and she understood, she was basically a living legend to those who had grown up after the Fourth Shinobi War. To them she was Uchiha Sakura, the Hana no Ishi, the Blossom Doctor. What made the stares at the Shino Academy more difficult to swallow was that many of them were new. The stares sometimes were from young women who seemed intimidated and jealous of her, or men who seemed conflicted on whether they wanted to demean her for thinking she was as good as them and courting her to make her theirs. When she had woken up in Soul Society, after dying from the backlash of an emergency chakra procedure that went wrong, she was found by Sasuke within 2 weeks. He had burst in through the shack she was using as a makeshift clinic, ran up to her and wouldn't let go. They spent the next month together, never leaving each other's sight. They were both back to the prime of their lives, looking as they did when Sarada was promoted to Jonin, and their little Akiara was graduating from the academy. The next years were some of the happiest she could remember, reminiscing with Tsunade and Shizune, seeing all the rookie 9 together again. All that was missing was their number 1 unpredictable ninja, and he showed up just like everyone knew he would. Seeing him and Hinata reunite was so heartwarming, even Sasuke teared up. It didn't escape her notice that once Naruto got settled into their little home, he began spending more time with the Shinobi Council. She knew now that it was about their entrance to the Gate 13. Sakura had been part of the group that received the first Shinigami delegation, and she had not been impressed. Flashback: I've just received word from Fukuro, they've made contact with the envoys. Sakura looked up from packing her medkit, she hoped there wouldn't be a need for it. Gaara had always struck her as possessing the opposite personality of Naruto, nevertheless like Naruto he knew how to command and lead. Temari stepped forward into the middle of their makeshift camp. You heard the Kazukiage, we're moving in 5 minutes. Finish breaking camp and be ready to head out in formation. Another reminder, the Kazukiage, myself and Narasan, are the only ones authorized to negotiate. The rest of you concentrate on watching the perimeter and if this goes sideways, the Kazugake is priority. Understood. Sakura, along with the 9 other members of their retinue, gave a collective hi. And resumed their tasks. They had left the enclave the morning before and camped out farther from the mountain, waiting for the Anbu squads to find the Shinigami before all meeting at a pre-selected location. Sakura was curious about these Shinigami, so far her only contact with them had been a patrol that passed her by when she was returning to the enclave after being found by Sasuke. They didn't seem particularly special aside from their ability to use Yin chakra. Be ready to patch up some scrape, Sakura. Temari's voice brought a smile to her face. Shika's wife had always been able to make her relax in tense situations. Scrapes, splinters, I even packed some pretty pink band-aids for us. Temari just chuckled and then gave the signal to leave. They arrived at the meeting place quickly enough. Tree running using Yin chakra wasn't easy and required quite a bit of concentration, but it was still faster than normal running. It was a fairly open clearing, a smattering of trees and some light bush. After they settled themselves near the center, Sakura, Gaara, Shikamaru and Temari all stayed while the other ninjas spread out and hid. Sakura leaned over to Temari, what were their original demands? Temari whispered back, they wanted the ninja they found to give up any clan or bloodline secrets, swear allegiance to Central 46, and then live in a secluded barracks under 247 guard. Sakura couldn't believe it, essentially they wanted them to willingly become prisoners. She drawled. Her longtime friend shrugged, who knows, from what we've gathered this Central 46 has been unchallenged for a long time. They might just not care. It's thanks to the Gate that the shinobi weren't forced to agree. Someone managed to explain that Madara and Kabuto weren't exactly normal ninja, then officers from something called the 10th Division confirmed it after doing their own scouting. But that information tucked away, Sakura heard the approach of the Shinigami. It had to be the Shinigami because Anbu were never that loud. Coming into the clearing was a Shinobi Anbu, the only unique marking was a kanji on their shoulder for Fukuro, followed by 4 Shinigami. As both parties came to a stop across from each other, it was the Shinigami who spoke first. Greetings. My name is Kichiki Takahiro, and I will represent both the illustrious Council of Central 46 and the great noble clan of Kichiki in these discussions. The speaker was a young-looking man, clean-shaven with sharp features. He had some sort ornate clip in his hair and a well-made silk scarf around his neck. With me is Shihoin Yonka, representative of the great noble clan of Shihoin. Referencing the women in dark orange and black robes, he finished with a slight bow. Takahiro's words were diplomatic, yet his face and body language radiated disdain, and it was obvious he wasn't exactly overjoyed to be there. Sakura had enough experience with politicians to pick up when they were bored and tired of you. Gaara took it all in stride though, his calm voice matching the Kichiki's. Greetings to you as well. I am Sabaku Gaara, Godin Kazukiage. I shall represent the Shinobi Council and the enclave of Yamagakure in these discussions. With me are my advisors Sabaku Tamari and Nara Shikamaru. Gaara paused, representative of the noble clan of Nara. Gaara's last addition surprised Kichiki and Shikamaru, but both were too experienced to let it show. Though Sakura noticed Shikamaru subtly shift his normal "I'm tired because I'm a slacker" pose into something closer to "I'm tired because this is beneath me" stance. Gaara snapped his fingers, and an Anbu, Tanuki, appeared with a small table and cushions. The two groups settled around the table as the Shinigami retrieved some paperwork from their satchels. One of Kichiki's assistants passed over copies that Tamari and Shikamaru began reading through. As per the authority of the Central 46, the following petition for the Shinobi Enclave has been offered with the full support and approval of the council. Kichiki began, agreement to this new arrangement would secure the Shinobi of Yamagakure a place in not only the Gate 13 but the Sirite as well. He paused to give the Shinobi a chance to read the initial wordings and inspect the seals and signatures. Gaara made a quick motion with his hand, Tamari's copy of the agreement was quickly passed to the Anbu agent who appeared. Sakura focused on the woman, Shihoin, she was watching the Anbu's motions with a predatory gaze and tracked him back to his hiding spot. The mysterious Shinigami seemed to sense the other Anbu and was discreetly making hand signs of her own, doubtlessly giving orders to her own hidden guards. The first part of the agreement ensures that the people known as Shinobi shall be given equal treatment to the other denizens of Soul Society. The second part details your incorporation into the Gate proper. His explanation was cut short when Gaara raised his hand. Please explain this section about being granted status as retainers in exchange for entrance to the Sirite. The Kichiki cleared his throat and composed himself, of course. Such a large population of Ryatsu rich souls requires a large amount of resources to manage and provide for. The proposed integration would have you individually apply for or be offered the privilege of joining a retainer clan inside the Sirite. This way, the process of becoming proper citizens of Soul Society can move quickly. Kichiki seemed very pleased with this whole retainer idea, but Sakura saw Shikamaru's frown grow deeper as the man's explanation went on. He leaned forward and whispered to Gaara, who turned back to the Shinigami with an unsatisfied look. Exactly what would becoming a part of one of these clans mean? Kichiki's shoulders tensed. You would pledge your loyalty to your ruling clan, follow their edicts, and listen to their decisions on where you and your people would fit best into the Sirite, he recited. Quick as a shuriken. Gaara bit back, essentially we would give up our independence and become servants of a much larger clan. We would lose not only our autonomy, but would be forced to adhere to laws and edicts we may not agree with or be able to follow. Shihoin in particular did not look pleased with Gaara's summarization. Do either of you know much of the elemental nation's history? Gaara queried. I will admit the Kichiki clan is still compiling geographical information about your lands and have not yet begun to research your history. As the keepers of knowledge and law, our great clan is expected to record your history and interactions with Soul Society. In that case I feel the need to educate you on the earliest part of Shinobi history. Gaara took a moment to drink from the water his Anbu had set out after they sat down. Before the creation of the hidden villages, Shinobi only existed as isolated families, passing on their techniques and skills from master to apprentice. Once the Shinobi population grew large enough, clans began to form. The Shinigami seemed slightly interested, no doubt recalling Shikamaru's improvised title. These clans ranged from as small as 20 members to well over 300. The largest clans, the Senju and Uchiha, both numbered nearly 500 in their prime, not counting their civilian members. They were capable of destroying armies, ending nations. Shinobi clans began as mercenaries and became something more, but that mercenary ruthlessness will always remain. Their Shinigami friends were paying attention now. When the clans eventually started uniting and forming alliances, politics simply became a new battlefield for the Shinobi to use against each other. Gaara paused and focused his considerable amount of yin chakra, hoping to add weight to his words. What you must understand is you do not speak to the representative of a rabble of unorganized brutes. I represent soldiers who bear the weight of hundreds of years of pride, knowledge and skill. There are clans among us who can trace their lineage back through 24 separate wars, hundreds of years of conflict. We may have left behind our savagery, but it has been tempered by cold brutality. War, honor, and pride are not foreign concepts to us, but our way of life. Gaara's presence had grown with the addition of his yin chakra. To Sakura, it felt like a weight was placed across her back until Central 46 recognizes that we wish to join the Gate 13 as newcomers worthy of respect, not as refugees to become subservient. These discussions cannot come to any meaningful conclusions. Gaara then stood, motioning for his full retinue of Anbu and shinobi to assemble behind him. I thank you for your time, and I will relay your proposal to the full Shinobi Council, but I would advise you to prepare for a total rejection. Good day Kichiki-san, good day Shihoin-san. They hadn't stayed around to see the looks on their counterparts' faces, but Sakura was pretty good at imagining. After that meeting, the Shinobi Council called a full assembly. The assembly had 50 spots on it. The representatives were elected by the general populace. There they explained the offer and the consequences. Everyone agreed that joining the Gate on those terms would set a bad precedent. Most shinobi decided it was a foregone conclusion that they would remain separate from the Gate and went about their business. When the Sandaime Hokage showed up in Shinigami robes to meet with the council, it didn't just set the rumor mill going, it lit it on fire and pushed it down a cliff. The public announcement of a small diplomatic group joining the Gate 13 as a test had the entire enclave scrambling. An unrelated fact that should be known, a shinobi village's biggest department is its information and logistics arm that is run exclusively by administrative shinobi. Take the field agents and their handlers into account, and you have a huge chunk of chunin and takubetsu jonin working exclusively under the intelligence banner for most, if not the entirety, of their careers. Combined, the public reveal that the shinobi would soon have diplomats, aka agents, inside the Gate, with literally hundreds of former intelligence workers who are somewhat bored, and you get an entire multi-armed department set up overnight ready and willing to be used by the Shinobi Council to begin collecting and analyzing information. Sakura had been more focused on making sure the Yama General Hospital was ready for Shizune to take over as director in her absence. When she reported to the Shinobi Council for the details on their departure for the Gate, she was ambushed by half a dozen people with dossiers and maps, lists of topics they wanted her to look into, and an impressive array of books and ink for her to record her findings in. Once everything had been squared away, she met up with the rest of her group and they began their journey to the Shino Academy. Sakura was doing all of this reflection while absent-mindedly going through some paperwork in the school infirmary. A few weeks into their classes during a first-year Hakuto spar, her partner sprained his ankle. Sakura took him to the infirmary personally, but there was no nurse on standby, so Sakura took it upon herself to help him. Flashback, I need you to hold still Amai-san. Amai-san was a fairly average-looking boy, he looked about 16 or 17 with shoulder-length hair tied in a small ponytail. They had been practicing Hakuto moves when Amai took a bad fall during one of their grapples. Hi, Sakura-san, I'll try. Amai's voice was shaky, his ankle had already swelled quite a bit and anytime Sakura moved it, she could feel him tense up. Sakura decided that the damage wasn't too bad, but the ankle definitely needed to be immobilized until the swelling went down. She called out for some help, hoping a doctor or nurse was in another room, but no one answered. Not one to let a patient suffer, Sakura found the supply closet and grabbed what she needed. The Sarate put on an appearance of tradition, and Sakura could only describe it as classical nostalgia, but it was in fact supported by quite advanced technology that wasn't widely available. Sakura found a small freezer with ice and grabbed a foot splint. Returning to Amai, she calmed him down and began treating his ankle. She proceeded to return to the back in search of crutches for the poor boy. Finding only a locked cabinet, Sakura resolved to track down a faculty member for help in finding the nurse. She returned to find two women, one in a simple white coat and the other in a pink uniform, examining Amai's foot. Deciding to speak up, Sakura stepped forward. Excuse me, are you the doctor? The most likely doctor quickly looked at Sakura and seemed confused before looking to her assistant. Do you recognize her? Seeing her assistant give a shake, the doctor stood up and walked over, extending her hand as she did. Hello, my name is Mima Yaname, I'm the head healer for the academy. Are you the one who patched up Amai-san's Anki? Sakura filed away the name and her title for later before responding, yes, it was just an accident in class. No one was here so I took the liberty of doing it myself. My name is Haruno Sakura, pleasure to meet you, I apologize if I overstepped my bounds. She gave an apologetic bow. Sakura knew how fragile the ego of a medical professional could be, and she had intense memories of coming into her office to find equipment and papers missing or misplaced. That day was the first time she fired a nurse on the spot, and she didn't regret it. The healer gave her a long look. I appreciate it, thank you. We were just answering a call to a 6th-year Zanjutsu class. Mima's eyes flickered back to Amai, who was being given some water by the nurse. Haruno-san, that splint was extremely well done. Do you have first aid training? Well, I have more than just first aid. Mima perked up. I've heard of there being healers out in the Rukongai. Did you learn from one of them? Sakura held back a chuckle at the woman's eagerness. No, I was the head of the Yamagakure hospital before joining in the academy. Head of the hospital? Mima seemed to be processing Sakura's words at half speed. Yama, wait, you're one of the diplomats. Sakura could see the nurse snap to attention and completely ignore Amai, but she just shrugged it off. Anyway, now that you're here, Amai is in safe hands, I need to get back to class. It was nice meeting you, Mima-san, have a good day. She gave a final bow and a wave to Amai before quickly stepping out. After their first meeting, it didn't take long for Mima to track her down again and invite her to lunch. That lunch turned into regular tea dates and eventually an offer to help out around the infirmary. Mima was the 13th seed of the 4th division before she had been assigned to oversee the academy. Mima enjoyed her job, the only part she didn't like was the 4th division's tendency to send unseated officers to work under her as part of their punishments. Her staff as a consequence was usually small and unenthusiastic, leading to many students choosing to avoid the infirmary and just take care of their injuries personally. When Mima found out that Sakura was a fully trained doctor, surgeon and had run a large hospital for decades, she nearly fainted. She got on her knees and pleaded for Sakura to volunteer in the infirmary, if nothing else than to help train her inexperienced nurses. After reviewing her mission directives and consulting Naruto and Shikamaru, Sakura accepted the offer. Access to a senior 4th division officer and the opportunity to endear herself to a number of unseated Shinigami was too tempting to pass up. That was all well and good, but Sakura mostly agreed because anything that could give her a reprieve from the interesting yet monotonous coursework was a godsend. Her name was already well known because of the opening ceremonies, but after treating the first few patients, all the students who used to avoid the infirmary started crawling out of the woodwork. Patients poured into her ward with everything from headaches to splinters and even a few extreme cases of self-inflicted bone breaks. Sakura had to put her foot down at that point. "Okay Hinoka-sensei, make sure to do the exercises I showed you and take the medicine until it runs out. After that come back and see me." Sakura left the elderly calligraphy instructor to her own devices as she went to put away her equipment. She had spent the last year learning about the state of medicine and general medical knowledge in the Gate. She was somewhat impressed. While the medical department seemed possess fairly basic computers and medical technology, most of their healing revolved around keto. Sakura knew firsthand how that kind of over-reliance could backfire on you. When she arrived at the enclave, she was roped into helping Shizune teach the doctors and nurses how to keep practicing medicine without their jutsu. Even diagnosing an injury without using chakra sensing was foreign to them. She had been lucky, Tsunade was a strict teacher, and many of her most advanced techniques were so difficult because they required a huge breadth of experience in non-jutsu medicine. Whereas most medical shinobi learned from a textbook and then moved on to using chakra, Sakura had learned enough to easily earn a civilian medical license alongside her jutsu training. In her reports, she was already detailing how to combine the few healing keto she had seen Mima use with the old chakra techniques the shinobi medics would be familiar with. The last bandages and patient files had been put away when Sakura heard a soft call from the entrance. Walking back into the lobby, she saw a Shinigami officer waiting to be helped. The woman had a soft smile on her face, she was slender and had a very youthful face. Her black hair was worn in a large braid going down her chest. Her blue eyes met Sakura's green the instant she stepped into the room. The woman was alert but not hostile. She gracefully approached Sakura before bowing. "Greetings, I'm looking for Haruno Sakura, do you know where I could find her?" Adopting her best patient-friendly smile, she just stepped out for a moment. "If you're in a hurry I can give her a message." Sakura wasn't sure why, but the Shinigami across from her gave her goosebumps. Sakura's attempt at fishing for a name or a purpose failed. The Shinigami gave her a bigger smile and said, "Haruno-san, dishonesty is not a very good trait in a healer." The smile plastered on Sakura's face grew tighter. Please excuse me, old habits die hard. How can help you Shinigami-san?" With the deception out of the way, both women relaxed. "My name is Yuichiro, I'm an officer in the 4th division. I came on behalf of my captain to speak to you Haruno-san." Motioning Yuichiro to follow her, she led them to the infirmary's small office. "I'm not sure what I have to offer Captain Unohana, I've only been a student for a short time." Sakura pondered as they sat down. "On the contrary, I'm just here to confirm some rumors that have drifted up the ranks. I'm not here to interrogate you, I'm here to clear the waters as it were." That caught Sakura off guard. She knew shinobi had the habit of being gossips, but she didn't think the same would apply to an organization like the Gate. She motioned for Yuichiro to continue. "The most prevalent rumors are that you can heal any injury with a kiss and that you give each of your patients a blooming flower to speed along their recovery." Yuichiro could barely withhold her laughter. Sakura's only reaction was a flat stare. Yuichiro got out her last giggles and compassed herself. "Forgive me. The rumor that actually warrants investigation is that you were the head of the Shinobi Enclave's hospital before becoming a student. That's what made it all the way up the ranks. You Shinigami must be more boring than I thought." "Yes, it's true. Before accepting the offer to join the Gate 13, I was the chief physician for Yamagakure General Hospital." "How did you manage to organize a hospital? Where would you get the equipment? Not to mention how long it would take to train up a staff large enough to operate an entire hospital." Yuichiro looked genuinely delighted and confused by her answer. "I thought it would have been well known. Shinobi that cross over to Soul Society retain their memories. As I understood it, shinobi simply had a better recollection of their life. Places, names, faces. I didn't even consider you could recall something as complicated as medical training. Sakura nodded her head in understanding, from what I've read it should be impossible to remember so much. Then again, compared to souls from the living world, shinobi are impossible to begin with. Thank you for your time. Haruno-san. Yuichiro rose, and the two made their way back to the front of the clinic. Have you given any thought to what squad you'd like to join after graduating? Sakura smirked. If it isn't obvious, the fourth would be my first choice, but my backup would be the Kido Corps. Sakura opened the door to let Yuichiro out. They bowed to each other, but before leaving Yuichiro had one last question. Haruno-san, what do you think is a healer's most important duty? Sakura took a few moments to come up with an answer. Well, personally I've always believed that the best healers have the power to stop any threats before they can do harm and the wisdom to accept that you can't save everyone. Life as a medic nin and surgeon was filled with loss, maybe not personal loss, but Sakura had seen many people die on the battlefield and the operating table. Some she had failed to save and some were beyond saving. To make peace with it she had to accept those deaths, carry the failures and then shed the guilt. In this way, Sakura always felt she was a better doctor than Tsunade. Ichiro didn't smile, she simply gave a single nod and then walked out. With her shift at the infirmary over, Sakura began making her way to the dorms, reflecting on her short interaction with the Soul Reaper. There was something about Yuichiro's gaze that unsettled her, her eyes seemed to flirt between calculating, approving and eagerness. Sakura only hoped it meant she'd put in a good word with Captain Unohana. A mighty slap followed by the crack of wood echoed inside the hall. The sides of which were filled with students. The racks adjacent to the door were packed with quite a few swords ranging from full-length katanas to wakazashis and tantos. The majority of the spectators were 5th and 6th year students, all with calloused hands and more than a few scars from sparring with live steel. They were also watching the center of the Zanjutsu dojo intently. Specifically, they were watching the man finishing a rather fast kata. He was of average height with gray hair, dark skin and a lollipop stuck in his mouth. He's wearing the standard blue student uniform, except he'd pulled the topcoat down to give his arms more freedom. He stands calmly on the mat, arranged around him are wooden pillars each the height of a grown man. This was Amoy's regular routine. He would start his warm-up with stretches and basic katas before going through a routine with a wooden stance. Taking deep breaths, Amoy cleared his mind and began mapping out his moves. Amoy might have had an overactive imagination, but like any skilled warrior he knew how to limit and focus his mind. With a single loud step the dojo was filled with the clack of wood on wood. Like music there wasn't a second that passed without sound. Amoy linked every movement of his body into the next hit. He brought his sword down on the first stand, pivoted to his left, and used the natural momentum of his body to strike the next stand. With his bakken now on his left side, he used his new stance to fluidly lunge and stab the stand an arm's length away. The intricate routine went on until every single one of the 20 stands had been hit, Amoy never stopping for more than a breath. His final hit actually bent its target, leaving the dojo still once more. The spectators gave a quiet clap which Amoy bowed to. After over a year of regular appearances, most of his classmates had become comfortable around him and lost the awestruck puppy looks. One of his closer acquaintances, a buddy more than a friend, came up to him. A little slow this morning, Amoy, you getting enough sleep? Fujioji was an intimidating figure from a distance. A woman composed of tough skin and strong muscles, her hair perpetually styled in a tight bun. Fujioji was one of the best Zanjutsu users in the academy, she came from a minor noble clan that had always prided themselves on their blade skills. She once joked she'd first held a sword as a toddler and the milk she had drank from her mother had been laced with iron. I think so, but I did wake up this morning without my pillow. What if I've been sleepwalking, leaving the academy at night and roaming the streets of the Sarate sword in hand fighting thugs and criminals that cross my path? I could be a vigilante and not even know it. One morning I might wake up in a cell with no memory of how I got there, covered in blood from the Shinigami I killed during my dream-fueled one-man crusade against injustice. That's nice, Amoy, I think you'd be a great crime fighter. Now come on, some of the other students want to spar. Fujioji gently guided the muttering Amoy to a seat and some water. She also had the patience to listen endlessly. Amoy suspected she had perfected the art of spacing out and let his speeches slide in one ear and out the other. Quickly the dojo was filled with the normal bustle of spars and practice. 6th-year students had unrestricted access to the Zanjutsu dojos outside of class, students in 1st to 5th had to get special permission from an instructor. Normally, the dojo would be filled with 6th-year students who specialized in Zanjutsu and maybe 1 or 2 5th-years who had advanced skills. Amoy learned all this from a dorm mate in his first week and quickly decided that he needed somewhere to practice without getting in trouble. Flashback, Amoy smoothly opened the door and stepped into the dojo. There were a number of duels going on, so most of the room's attention was focused on the mats. He glanced at the weapons held along the walls, there weren't many. Boy. The call came from his right, Amoy turned to see two men and a woman approaching him. The man leading the trio had an irritated look on his face, it reminded him of the more arrogant cloud shinobi he had worked with. He put on his best polite face and gave a small bow, hello. The trio stopped, the leader was a few inches taller than he had light brown hair slicked back with muddy green eyes. He ran his eyes over Amoy's frame a few times before noticing the lack of sword on his waist or the wall. I haven't seen you around before. What year are you in? His voice may have been posturing, but there was a hint of strength to it. The question was innocent enough, I'm a new student senpai, but my friends and I have been put into fourth-year classes. Amoy's new friend started twitching rather badly, Amoy hoped that his luck was going to hold and this wouldn't turn into a situation. The two companions seemed to be eyeing their leader with some hesitance. In that case, I think you've read your schedule wrong. Right now the Zanjutsu dojo is only open to certain students. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Amoy simply shrugs, I'm pretty sure I'm in the right place. If you could just point me to. He pulled out a sealed letter and read the name inked on the front, Shiba Hiroji, he'll straighten everything out. The leader went very still, eyes flickering between Amoy's face and the letter in question. Slowly, he held out his hand, I'm Shiba Hiroji. Amoy answered by passing the letter open and watching his senpai read it carefully. The lead Hiroji handed the letter over to his friend who also read it, then snapped his head up, you're Aida Amoy. You're one of the shinobi diplomats. Hiroji followed up, dropping into a bow after Amoy nodded. Please forgive my rudeness. Hiroji looked up and found a wrapped lollipop behind held in front of his face. He met Amoy's easy smile with one of his. Apology accepted. Mind explaining how things work around here? I don't want to step on any toes. Sure, let me show you around. As Amoy and Hiroji began walking, Hiroji waved his companions off. Hiroji showed Amoy the appropriate places to spectate and spar, the rules and etiquette expected of him, and explained his abrasive attitude. Duels aren't uncommon here. If you're here outside of class, everyone else assumes a certain amount of skill from you. In the past, students who didn't receive permission or bribe their way in have ended up in duels and left injured, a few even dead. I might not be the best swordsman here, but I like to make sure only people who are ready are here. Amoy was watching a spar between two adequate warriors while listening, understandable. Does this mean I need to prove myself somehow? Hiroji chuckled, no need to prove yourself. Hiroji caught the eye of someone across the hall, a man with two scars running horizontally above his left eye. Hiroji seemed to reconsider, at least, you don't have to prove yourself to me. I'll just tell you to watch who ends up watching you. Amoy finished his lollipop and pulled out a fresh one, also eyeing the man, I'll keep that in mind. Amoy was in the middle of correcting another student's form when a throat was cleared behind him. Turning he couldn't stop himself from tensing, Sachiko-san, how can I help you? It turned out the scarred man Hiroji was wary of was a 6th-year Zanjutsu prodigy named Sachiko Niero. Niero's clan, the Sachiko, act as one of the guards of Central 46, they are disciplined and expected to enforce order and loyalty among the citizens of Seoul society. It wasn't exactly a secret that many members of Central 46 didn't trust the shinobi and not so subtly had pushed for the forced integration and subjugation of the enclave. That attitude had trickled down to some of the clan members attending the academy. Niero had been giving Amoy looks ever since learning his name. Amoy suspected that words had been exchanged with his clan and Niero was simply awaiting instruction. After all, how many had access to the shinobi away from the faculty and in private? Amoy had been expecting this. Aida-san, I've come to challenge you. Niero's voice was softer than one would expect. A few students had said he took after his mother in many regards. Very well, what are the terms? The spectators nearby had gone silent. Live steel, to first blood. Who's gonna judge? Niero looked to Fujioji who was quickly making her way over to them. I trust Runshi-san to be impartial. Fujioji looked to Amoy who gave a small nod, I agree. Are there any stakes? The two began moving onto the mats, positioning themselves opposite of each other. The other duels in the dojo were put on hold as everyone paused to watch. Niero was considered one of the, if not the best swordsman in his year. Amoy was considered by many to be one of the best swordsmen in the entire academy, only lagging behind some others because of his lack of shikai, the traditional sign of a prodigy. If I am victorious you, Aida Amoy, shall agree to serve the Sachiko clan as a retainer for 20 years. His declaration caused quite a stir. Amoy had an uncharacteristic look of deep concentration. He was weighing the pros and cons of being forced into such a position. He was confident he could keep critical information classified if he lost, but being pulled into such a political situation without any strong allies to pull him out was worrying. He might not be able to come up with 1,001 solutions like Shikamaru, he could definitely manage a dozen or so. If you are the victor the first, Sachiko Niero, shall agree to serve as your bodyguard and attendant for the same 20 years. That certainly changed things. The Sachiko might not have been an especially important clan, but they had connections. Being able to turn the next Sachiko head into an ally, perhaps even a confidant, would be a great first step in establishing the shinobi inside the Sirite. I accept. Fujioji stood between the two as another student brought them their swords. Another student handed her a red flag. The contest shall be to first blood. The terms are set and shall be respected. Amoi's blade was a kodachi, a short sword about 60 centimeters in length, with a candy red handle and a white guard. Niero's blade was a tachi, it was the length of a katana but was more curved, it had a dark green sheath, and the handle seemed to be made of a single piece of unwrapped iron. It hung horizontally across his back. Fujioji held the flag above her head, begin. And brought it down. Amoy and Nero lunged forward, closing the distance between them while drawing their blades. Amoy had less reach and had to deflect a few probing stabs from Nero. In response, Amoy feinted left and closed in, briefly locking shoulders with Nero, who absorbed the shock and used the momentum to shift Amoy off balance and attempted to slash his exposed back. Instead of tripping, Amoy dived before quickly turning to deflect Nero's follow-up. Noticing how out of position they both were, slowly the two men walked back to the middle of the mat. Nero widened his stance and shifted so his blade was laying across his right shoulder, and while his right arm reached to touch his left elbow. He quickly shouted, "Hold your burden, Amatai Futen, heavy burden." A dark light exploded from his sword, concealing him momentarily. Amoy tried to rush for a quick attack but wasn't quick enough. As his blade stretched out, a flash of iron came from the light and slammed into Amoy's sword, sending it straight into the ground without resistance. Amoy barely held onto the grip, nearly losing his hold on the blade. Stepping out of the light, the change to Nero was obvious, his once curved steel sword had reversed directions. The curve now running along the back of the blade, it resembles a cross between a katana and a sickle, the steel having been replaced by raw sharpened iron. Amoy collected himself, and when Nero made another lunge, he brought up his sword to deflect it down to his right, which would open up Nero's side. That plan was trashed when at the moment Amoy made contact with Nero, his blade was again nearly thrown from his hands. Dodging the next few slashes, Amoy narrowly dodged a cut to the leg. "Aida-san, I respect you for your skill. Please understand that this duel is for the honor of our respective people, nothing more." Amoy took in his words and decided to overcome Nero's unknown Shikai ability with speed. Focusing, Amoy shunpo twice, to Nero's backside and then again to his right, each time getting closer. His shunpo was fast enough that Nero was only able to bring his sword up in the last second guard after turning right. Amoy knew that his kodachi would nick the tip of Nero's before continuing down and cutting through his shoulder. "Shikai, don't forget about Shikai," was Amoy's only thought. His sword had nicked the tip of Nero's blade, it should have continued down as gravity commanded. Should have, what it did do was go back up. Amoy had thought the deflection was caused by Nero's Shikai granting extreme strength or something similar. His new theory was that the sword actually repulsed whatever struck it. He couldn't use any Kido or Bakuto because of the duel's rules, he wasn't fast enough to outmaneuver him when even just a glancing touch would throw off his strike. What to do, what to do. If he lost he'd become a retainer, the Sachiko clan would expect him to do as they said. They could torture him, get him thrown in jail, they could just kill him, and nothing would ever come of it. He was really starting to like this place too. Amoy's thought process was stopped when he had to dodge a low whip from Nero that caught Amoy's sheath and sent him flipping end over end. Nero wasn't taking any chances and pinned Amoy's shoulder to the floor with his knee and brought his blade down quickly. Amoy began struggling to move when he heard a voice, it was young with a formal accent. "You have reached your height. Your worst nightmare has come to pass. Even if you survive your captivity you will never recover from this loss. I have a responsibility. I have a mission. I have a future." Amoy helplessly replied. "It matters not. You cannot reach any higher." Amoy looked into the reflection of his own blade, moving in slow motion to put up some kind of defense. He could see the sky, see his own grave, even see his death. What a death it would be, fighting with everything he had mentally and physically. Amoy was laid back, he was not lazy. You couldn't devote your life to Kenjutsu and be lazy, the two are incompatible. He had to come back from this. All his life, as long as he had steel in his hand, he could come back from any defeat. After the death of his brother and father, Killer Bee and Kamui's death, he poured his loss and rage into his Kenjutsu styles. He came out of that time tempered and resolved. He took on apprentices and taught them everything he knew. When his leg gave out in a duel with a samurai, he knew his students would take his energy and add to it, growing it into something new, something better. He just had to do it again. He had been knocked down, now he had to come back up. It was so simple. Fault Subum GC, swallow turn. Amoy's kodachi hadn't been long enough to cross Nero's blade. With Amoy's scream his blade transformed in a storm of feathers. Nero felt his blade slam into something and saw that Amoy was now wielding an adachi, a sword nearly 90 centimeters long. It had been rebounded but wedged itself into the dojo floor, keeping Amoy safe. Picking Nihiro back, Amoy regained his footing. Politics always gets in the way of skill. You learn when to ignore it. Sachiko-san. Amoy's advice was punctuated by a leap across the mats, with his Nadachi held high. Nihiro hunkered down and prepared, not for the block, but for the opportunity to strike Amoy after he was deflected. When the Nadachi came down, it hit nothing but air. Nihiro had his sword in a horizontal guard, caught unaware he simply shifted his blade down to block again. As Amoy brought his blade up, feathers fell to the floor. The iron sickle sword and the washing pole met. They held against each other for a microsecond, long enough for Nihiro to register his Shikai ability's failure, before the stalemate broke. Nihiro fell back to the floor, bleeding from his nose. Amoy stood above him, swallow feathers gently blowing around his feet. Chapter 6. Amicable Espionage. The sun peeked over the academy and illuminated the courtyard. The white stone was well cared for and led from the doors of the building to the farthest wall, about 20 feet away. The wall itself was marked with cracks, ash and craters. Dozens of targets held up by poles stood in front of the abused wall. The searing blue light explodes across the courtyard, the wave of light forming a sphere that flew toward some of the lower targets. As it traveled, the energy began to dissipate and the ball went off course, smashing into the ground and shooting pieces of rubble into the air. Pacing at the origin of the light was Lee. He rubbed his hands over his face before setting his sights on the targets. If I cannot cast this Kido correctly, I will run the academy obstacle course 100 times on one leg. Lee thrust out his right palm while intoning, "Ye Lord. Mask of flesh and bone, flutter of wings, ye who bears the name of man. Truth and temperance, upon this sinless wall of dreams unleash, but slightly the wrath of your claws." Heido number 33. Sakatsui. Blue light gathered around his arm before surging into his outstretched hand, coalescing into a sphere that burst out at high speeds. Lee watched as his spell nearly made it to the target, only to lose cohesion and hit the ground once again. Lee let out a frustrated cry and bounced forward onto his hands. He began handstand walking around the practice area. Lee's frustration was actually cumulative. With his newfound ability in Kido and Reiatsu manipulation, he had been working hard to improve. Unlike his fellow shinobi, Lee didn't have decades of experience manipulating chakra to rely on when learning Kido. He was basically starting from scratch and had to devote a lot of his free time to catch up with his comrades. He had finally managed to break into the 30-level Heidos and was working through the 20-level Bakudos. Considering that to graduate you only needed to perform the first 10 spells in each category, Lee was doing exceptionally well, but had decided to ease out of his Kido in favor of the other fields until graduating. Heido number 33. Sakatsui was the final one he wanted to learn, but it was proving to be a hard nut to crack. At its base, Sakatsui is simply a more powerful version of number 31. Shakuho, but the extra energy and range of the spell necessitated more control that Lee didn't seem capable of. Lee was so lost in thought he had begun to do handstand push-ups, lost in his own world he nearly fell over when a soft voice called out to him. "Excuse me." Lee managed to turn his fall into a flip and came upright to see a Shinigami in black robes walking towards him. The newcomer had mild features and brown scholarly hair. He wore a pair of square glasses in front of his soft brown eyes. He gave a soft smile as he walked close enough to speak. "My apologies, I just wanted to let you know that the training ground is booked for the rest of the morning." Lee was quick to introduce himself and apologize, but was cut off. "There's no need, it's nice to meet you, Lee-san. My name is Sasuke-san." Lee learned Aizen was an officer in the 5th Division and had come to the academy as a favor to the first-year Kido instructors. He was going to be giving a seminar on the finer points of Kido before doing a session of personal instruction to help the new students get a firm grasp on the beginnings of Heido and Bakudo. One thing led to another and Aizen asked if Lee would like to participate. Lee enthusiastically agreed. Aizen chuckled at Lee's energetic personality and spoke with him until the seminar began. Lee sat enraptured by Aizen. His first forays into Kido under the guidance of the academy instructors hadn't been easy. His comrades couldn't help him too much either, they were used to manipulating energy subconsciously. It was like trying to describe muscle memory to someone who had never used their arms. Lee overcame it with determination and boundless energy. From his experimentation with his Zanpakuto though he wanted to dive headfirst into Kido, but decided to shore up his other skills to an acceptable level before then. Aizen explained Kido in a unique way. The conventional method described it as taking your Reiatsu and allowing the incantation to shape it. Aizen's method involved slowly studying the way the Reiatsu moves and then mimicking it while saying the spell. This combination made it much easier to use the spell without the incantation, but take much longer to truly master. Lee was amazed at Aizen's ability to woo the crowd of students. He reminded him of the speeches given by the 3rd Hokage in his childhood. Calm, gentle but backed by wisdom, Aizen answered any and all questions with poise and thoughtful responses. At the end of the session Lee at the practice range. Raising his palm up he took deep breaths and intoned once again, taking care to enunciate each word, "Ye Lord. Mask of flesh and bone, flutter of wings, ye who bears the name of man. Truth and temperance, upon this sinless wall of dreams unleash, but slightly the wrath of your claws." Hado number 33. Sakatsui. The blue sphere quickly formed and shot off, not as fast this time. It sailed straight and narrow but began to lose shape. Lee leaned forward, willing it to stay together. A loud bang and a cloud of dust revealed two targets side by side completely shattered and a line carved into the wall behind. Aizen came up to him clapping with a wide smile, "Very good Lee-kun. Keep practicing and Keto will become a very reliable tool for you." Slightly embarrassed, Lee rubbed his nose to cover up his blush. "I have you to thank Aizen-san, Keto takes a lot of concentration and effort for me. Your words and guidance are truly great, you are indeed a very youthful teacher." Aizen seemed amused but didn't seem to be laughing at Lee's quirky way of speaking. He gave Lee's shoulder a squeeze. "In any case, I look forward to seeing your progress. When you graduate maybe consider joining my division, the 5th could use a hard worker like you." Lee had stars in his eyes, "I will keep that in mind Aizen-san." Aizen bowed, "Until next time Lee-kun," and made for the exit. "Until our youths converge once more Aizen-san." Lee's cry echoed across the court and he left minutes later with a satisfied smile and a gleam of appreciation in his big eyes. Shikamaru missed his wife. The silent calculating former advisor to the Hokage was feeling lonely. Academy regulations made it clear that only students, staff and Shinigami officers could visit the academy regularly. The only time outsiders were permitted on campus was with permission from the headmaster. Exceptions existed of course, during New Year's each student was allowed up to 3 visitors for the day to enjoy the festivities. Another regulation was that students were not allowed to leave campus without permission. These two facts meant Shikamaru had only seen his wife once in the last year, they exchanged letters, but it wasn't the same. Shikamaru and Temari had passed away together shortly after their retirement from active duty. They had both been hit by a mysterious jutsu from a rogue Kiri clan. It had damaged their veins and muscles. Sakura had been able to mitigate the effect and heal the damage, but the long-term effects eventually caught up to them. Entering Soul Society had been a shock, but he and Temari had settled into a comfortable routine. They got to one of the nicer districts, District 4, and built a small house. Shikamaru became an ad hoc accountant for the local merchants, saving them quite a bit of money and pointing out inconsistencies. Temari spent her days at a local medicine shop, helping to care for the various herbs and ingredients. Soon enough they began encountering Shinigami who frequented the district. Shikamaru in particular ended up at the same bar as them and earned a reputation for being a good opponent in shogi and go. It was during a game against a Shinigami officer that he heard about the appearance of the shinobi and their apparent dismissal from the Gate. That night he went home and informed Temari. They began making plans to search out the shinobi. Temari started cultivating her own medicine and Shikamaru used his merchant contacts to start gathering information. A couple of weeks later the couple made a quick tour of the neighboring districts, ostensibly so Temari could sell her herbs to the local shops, but also for Shikamaru to begin laying the base for rumor network would be a better description than spy network. He balanced the books for a couple merchants, a few bars and inns, just asking that if they heard anything interesting, they let him know. For the next 4 or 5 months they kept on, Temari got very familiar with the local fauna and Shikamaru gained a reputation as the one to call if you wanted to put your finances in the black. The Nara was worried whoever had already crossed over had either died or gone to ground until he decided to check in on a tip about a mysterious woodworker who had shown up in District 8. Flashback, the shop was squished in between a school and a pottery shop. It was unassuming, but Shikamaru could smell sawdust as soon as he stepped up to the door. He slid it open and stepped inside, Temari following. Shikamaru quickly took in the workspace, filled with wood and various finished projects. He could make out some farm tools, pottery equipment and some simple toys. Temari then grabbed his collar and roughly jerked him towards her. He barely got a word out, "Whoa dear what's wrong?" when he noticed the intricate carving hanging against the shop wall. It was about the size of a serving tray, made from dark cherry wood with a slightly red stain, etched meticulously into it was the symbol of Konohakagure. Shikamaru felt the knot of tension in his belly, which he had been expertly ignoring for the last few weeks, uncoil. Another door in the corner of the shop slid open, out stepped a man with short brown hair and black almond-shaped eyes wearing a sleeveless shirt and an apron. Speaking of almond-shaped eyes, they had turned into full circles when he spotted the couple standing in his shop. Shikamaru. Temari. Yamato was already halfway across the room. Yamato. Shikamaru was sporting a wide grin as he embraced his fellow shinobi. Then flashback, Yamato had been part of a smaller group of shinobi who all ended up in the same district after being consod. By chance they ran into the group that had left the Serite after being detained by the Gate 13. Together they had set up a camp in the forests of District 10. That had been quite some time ago. They had recently decided to send out agents to find more shinobi and direct them to the camp. Yamato was just one of many sent out as shopkeepers and travelers. In short order they had directions and a list of passcodes memorized. They spent a couple weeks closing their home down and tying up loose ends before heading for District 10. There was a lot of sappy reunions. Shikamaru finally got to introduce his parents to his wife and tell them about his son. Tamari didn't let Gaara and Kankuro out of her sight for weeks. Seeing his dad, Uncle Chao's and Uncle Inoichi, it ranked right up there with the first time he held Shikadai. Shikamaru and Tamari were both quickly pulled into the cage's inner circles. Shikamaru began overseeing the infrastructure of the camp. Alongside a number of Iwa shinobi, he mapped out the plans for the mountain enclave. Shinobi began to trickle in as the word spread further and further. It wasn't long before there were 200 people living in Yamagakure, the village hidden in the mountain. That number had grown to 400 when the Sandaime arrived to negotiate. He had agreed to join the Gate 13, with Naruto leading them he couldn't refuse. Shikamaru's initial impressions of the Gate hadn't been kind, but he decided to withhold judgment until they had a better understanding of the organization as a whole. His objective was to learn the ins and outs of the Gate's structure and their mentality. Hanging around with students wasn't the way to do that, instead he began ingratiating himself with the teachers. Unlike his teammates, who geared their personalities toward the younger and more impressionable students, Shikamaru maintained his air of authority and maturity, deterring his classmates and instructors from perceiving him as one of kids. It started with small talk outside of class on advanced subjects, moved on to shogi games, and eventually led to invitations to small gatherings out in the Serite. That's where he was now, at a small bar the academy staff frequented. He'd been invited to the teacher's annual pre-graduation celebration. Normally he would use the occasion to gather more information, except he'd been hit by a deep longing to see Tamari that morning and couldn't stop himself from moping. He held up his hand and started motioning for another bottle of sake when a full bottle was set down right in front of him. "Care to share a drink, Nara-san?" The voice gave him a headache. It was light, teasing and so obviously fake. Shikamaru slowly pulled up from his slouch and came face to face with a tall, lean-built man with light skin and gray eyes. His hair was messy and light blonde, almost pale, with strands framing the sides of the face and hanging between his eyes. The stranger was also sporting a smile so fake it reminded him of Sai before Ino got a hold of him. Shikamaru didn't give the sword and black robes a second glance before making a lazy wave toward the opposite side of the table. He ignored the Shinigami officer in favor of pouring 2 cups. He passed one over and raised a toast. They both drank quickly. Nothing quite like a drink on a cold night, Nara-san. You're not wrong. I've read that you shinobi had quite a variety of liquor back in the elemental nations. Yay, have you been there often? Ooh no, I just read some of the reports coming out of the 10th division. They're quite popular, you know. Shikamaru could only muster up an eyebrow raise. Good to know my homeland makes for interesting reading. Where are my manners? His new drinking partner bowed. Urahara Kisuke at your service. You already seem to know me. Shikamaru wasn't impressed. The whole mysterious, polite genius shtick got old by the time Kabuto was finally put in the ground. Hiding your intelligence behind a quirky dunce persona was counter to the Nara approach. Well, the academy staff has such glowing things to say. It's not surprising your name filtered up the ranks. All our names, Shikamaru concluded. He had been hoping Sakura's meeting had been coincidental. Well, the Gate seems to appreciate skill. We shinobi just happen to have a lot of it. Skill is a good way to describe it. Say Urahara leaned his elbows onto the table and rested his chin in his hands. He looked like a child about to ask his father a question. Would you be able to explain something to me, Nara-kun? Shikamaru let the question hang, shifting his attention to refilling their cups before answering. I'd be willing to, if you met me halfway. Urahara, already becoming the most troublesome blonde Shika knew, grinned while his eyes lit up in interest. A bargain, you're very daring for an academy student, Nara-kun. I'm curious enough to agree. Shikamaru gave a shrug and leaned back onto his hands. You can go first. Myself and some of my, let's call them, colleagues are curious. We've been asking ourselves, what's the best way to deal with the shinobi? You see, there's a lot of people worried about split allegiances. The clans are annoying enough as is. Some of us don't know if the Gate can handle having another faction thrown into the mix. What I want to know, Nara-kun, is how do the shinobi fit into Soul Society? Urahara ended his rambling with a giggle. There was that glimpse of unhinged sanity Shika had been looking for. Shikamaru took less than a second to reply. Throughout history there have been many shinobi that like to think of themselves as philosophers. They came up with 101 different interpretations on what being a shinobi truly meant. Early thought said that a shinobi is a warrior who should fight for the survival of the clan and nothing more. It evolved into a school of thought that said shinobi should be tools, unfeeling and unthinking, nothing more than a means to an end. Of course you have leaders who believe shinobi are guardians, men and women who willingly go into the shadows for the sake of those they love and cherish. I'm a big believer in the last one. Shikamaru finished the last of his liquor with a single gulp. The truth is, all you need to do is give us shinobi a place and people to fight for. We're like dogs that way, we'll kill gladly and happily if we get our treat and pet at the end of the day. Interesting. I have one more thing to ask, but please, you had a question for me? Just a simple one. Oh, there's no such thing as simple question, Nara-kun, we both know that. If the shinobi wish to gain a certain amount of protection, where could they find it? Urahara was playing with one of his bangs while Shikamaru spoke. Well, there are a couple of key organizations within the Gate. I'm sure you learned about them in the academy. It wasn't too hard to discern the important information from the bland textbooks. From my estimation, while the Captain Commander nominally holds ultimate power in the Gate, he needs the support of others to maintain control. Urahara simply waited for him to continue. Shikamaru rolled his eyes. On paper, the Onmitsukid and the Kido Corps both report to the Captain Commander and follow his orders. From what I've been able to gather, it's more like they're autonomous organizations that are allied with the Gate 13. Oh, and why would they do that? Both organizations were started independently of the Gate and were only merged into the structure by the Captain Commander's clever politicking. I doubt they would give up their control so easily. The Captain Commander also has to obey Central 46, which means he has to have the support of at least a few key nobles to maintain power. Finally, there are the captains. They, more so even than the Captain Commander, hold the most sway over the Gate 13. Their troops are often loyal to a fault, especially the ones from minor clans or the Rukongai. What I want to know is who out of that list would be our best bet. Urahara's coy grin had turned into a full-blown smile, teeth and all. Shikamaru hoped the man was only a messenger, he wouldn't survive having to deal with him more than once. The ideal scenario would be to have shinobi in every possibly place at varying levels of authority. Obviously, but that's not realistic right now. Then the best you could would be to get one of your own chosen to be a captain as quickly as possible. Having friends in the 2nd Division and Kido Corps would certainly help. As for Central 46, really you just need to make nice with one, hopefully two, of the 4 great noble families. Once you have those bonds cemented, it will be much easier to ease into the rest of the Sirte. Shikamaru gave it some thought before sighing and generally began looking miserable. If I were looking to make friends, he closed his eyes, as if trying to ward off the coming answer, who would I speak to? Ooh my. Urahara exclaimed, just loud enough for others to look over. Shikamaru tried to hide his face in his cup but wasn't very successful, the whole place was whispering now. I suppose I could help you out, I know a fair share of Shinigami. I would need a favor or two in exchange. What kind of favor? Just a couple more meetings like this, 1 or 2 nights out. A chance for us to exchange ideas, you could say. Shikamaru waved for the waitress, who brought over a full bottle. He quickly poured 2 saucers and brought one to his lips. Just so you know, I married and tossed the rice wine back, preparing himself for the troublesome nights. What if Naruto becomes a Shinigami Captain? Thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.